Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and give you access to some really specific, often hard-to-find knowledge.
Exactly.
And today, we're starting something big, a deep dive into a particular book. GEHEIMAKTE 9/11, Verschwiegene Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
That's the one. It translates roughly to the secret file on 9/11 concealed facts of the 9/11 Commission Reports.
And our plan is to go through this entire book, chapter by chapter, in our deep dives moving forward.
That's right. So for today, we're focusing squarely on Chapter 1. It's titled simply Osama Bin Laden.
Okay.
And this chapter really sets the stage. It immediately challenges some common narratives about Bin Laden, his official status after 9/11, what he apparently said initially, and the whole communication trail.
Right. So we're digging into the core question based on the source material. What did Bin Laden, the Taliban, and even U.S. officials actually say about his involvement right after 9/11? And crucially, how did those stories, how did they evolve according to this book?
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's kick off with something that, the source presents it as potentially the most startling fact right up front. According to the secret file on 9/11, Osama bin Laden was not officially wanted by the FBI for the September 11th attacks.
Yeah, that's a big claim. The source gives a specific date and person for confirmation, too. June 5th, 2006. It was the FBI Chief of Investigative Publicity, Rex Toom, who apparently told a reporter, Ed Haas. And the reason given? 5 years after the event.
What was it?
A lack of evidence to formally add the 9/11 charges to his wanted poster.
Hold on. A lack of evidence. 5 years later. But the entire, justification for the war in Afghanistan, the global narrative, it was all built on his direct responsibility from day one.
That's the dissonance the book highlights right at the beginning. It suggests a gap between, let's say, the political certainty and the formal legal evidence threshold required by the FBI for its official charges.
Okay, so if the FBI hadn't formally pinned 9/11 on him, even by 2006, what was being said immediately after the attacks, like in September 2001, what was bin Laden himself saying, according to the sources cited here?
Well, the initial statements documented in the book are described as clear denials.
Denials.
Yes. For instance, on September 17th, 2001, Al Jazeera reportedly published a faxed statement attributed to bin Laden.
Okay.
In it, he categorically denied involvement. He also stressed, apparently, that he was operating under the authority of the Taliban leader, Mullah Omar, who wouldn't permit such actions from Afghan soil.
And that wasn't an isolated message.
No, the book mentions other accounts, like a close advisor to bin Laden, quoted by Jamal Ismail of Abu Dhabi television. This was even earlier, September 12th.
The day after.
Right. This advisor apparently said bin Laden saw the attacks as divine punishment for American policies, but claimed bin Laden himself had no connection to the attackers or their specific aims.
So, thankful for the outcome, but denying involvement.
That's the gist of that report. And then you have corroboration from Taliban officials.
Like who?
The Taliban ambassador to Pakistan at the time, Mullah Abdul Salam Saif. He stated on September 13th that bin Laden personally told him al-Qaeda had no hand in this action.
Okay, and there's another specific quote mentioned from a newspaper.
Yes, the Karachi newspaper Ummat. On September 28th, 2001, this quote is quite detailed.
What did it say?
According to the source, bin Laden is quoted not only denying involvement again, but specifically stating that Islam prohibits the killing of innocent women, children, and other non-combatants, even during war. He drew a sort of moral line.
Interesting. So a flurry of denials from bin Laden, his advisors, the Taliban.
Exactly. And this leads, according to the book, to a crucial moment. On September 21st, 2001, the Taliban made a public offer.
An offer.
They offered to hand over bin Laden to a third country for trial if the U.S. government provided concrete, publicly available evidence linking him to 9/11.
Okay, concrete, publicly available evidence. What does the source say about that? Did the U.S. provide it?
Well, the book makes a point of saying that, to this day, the U.S. has not presented evidence that meets the standard of being court-proof in this context.
Let's be clear on that term, court-proof.
Yeah.
We're talking evidence that would stand up in, say, a U.S. federal court. High legal standard.
Precisely. Admissible, verifiable, beyond circumstantial. That's the implication. The source uses the fact that this offer was made and apparently not met with that specific kind of public proof as a key point.
So if the initial reaction was denial and the offer for proof wasn't taken up in that specific way, how did the narrative shift so firmly towards his guilt? The book points to the videos, right?
Yes, the infamous confession videos. The source casts significant doubt on them, starting with the first one.
Which one was that?
The one supposedly found in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, around November 9th, 2001.
Okay, what are the issues raised?
Several.
Yeah.
First, the book states it's widely doubted internationally. But even looking at the content itself, Bin Laden apparently only refers to the 9/11 events. He doesn't explicitly take personal credit for ordering or masterminding them in that video. It's more ambiguous.
Ambiguous content. What else?
This is a major point in the book, the translation.
Ah, right. Tell us about that.
The official U.S. government translation of that tape was compared to an independent translation commissioned by a respected German TV magazine, ARD's Monitor.
Okay. And there.
Monitor used sworn, court-certified linguists. Their findings, reported in December 2001, were stark. They concluded the U.S. version was, and I quote the book's description of their findings, manipulated, supplemented, and flawed.
Manipulated. That's a very strong claim based on the source's reporting of the Monitor analysis.
It is. It raises fundamental questions about the reliability of that key piece of evidence as it was presented to the public.
And the source mentions visual doubts, too.
Yes, that the man in that specific video, well, observers noted he didn't look quite like the Bin Laden people were used to seeing in prior footage. Physical discrepancies were pointed out.
Okay, so doubts about the content, the translation, even the person's appearance in the first video. What about later videos?
Well, a second video surfaced shortly after, November 19th, 2001. Again, it reportedly praised the attacks, but stopped short of claiming direct responsibility.
Right.
Then there's a significant gap. The next major video cited is from October 29th, 2004.
October 2004. That timing seems important.
Extremely. It was just 4 days before the U.S. presidential election between George W. Bush and John Kerry.
And this video.
This is the one where Bin Laden, allegedly for the first time, explicitly claims responsibility for 9/11.
Wow. 4 days before an election. The source comments on the impact.
It does. It notes that following the video's release, President Bush's poll numbers jumped about 6% against Kerry. The timing and the content are presented as highly suspect regarding potential manipulation or authenticity.
A potential October surprise generated by someone.
The implication is certainly there, and the questions continued with later appearances.
Such as?
A fourth video, mentioned as appearing on September 7th, 2007. This was after almost 3 years of video silence.
Okay.
And the description in the source is striking. Bin Laden appeared, quote, rejuvenated with a completely black beard and altered facial features. Again, raising flags about authenticity and consistency.
So a pattern of questionable videos used to cement responsibility. Let's shift gears slightly. The book also talks about doubts.
Yeah.
Not just about his responsibility, but about whether he was even alive for long after 9/11.
Yes, this is another major thread in the chapter. It points to statements from U.S. officials themselves that seem to downplay his significance or hint at his demise quite early on.
Like President Bush.
Exactly. The source quotes President Bush from March 13th, 2002. He said, I don't think much about him, to be honest. I'm not really interested in him, which seems odd for the supposed mastermind of 9/11.
Very odd. But it wasn't just him.
No, what's really striking, according to the book, is the number of high-level intelligence and government figures from the U.S. and allied nations who publicly stated they believed Bin Laden was likely dead by early 2002.
Why do you think that?
Often citing his known serious health problems, particularly kidney disease requiring dialysis. The thinking was he likely couldn't have survived long without proper medical care, especially on the run in Afghanistan or Pakistan.
Can you give us some names the source mentions? Who believe this?
Sure. The book lists people like Pakistan's then president, General Pervez Musharraf, the FBI's counterterrorism chief, Dale Watson, veteran CIA field officer Robert Baer, even Robert Gates, who later became U.S. Defense Secretary.
That's quite a list of informed individuals expressing doubt about his survival early on.
It suggests a strong undercurrent of belief within intelligence circles that contrasted sharply with the continued public hunt and the later video appearances.
And this belief was reflected in U.S. actions, too.
The source points to the dissolution of the CIA's dedicated Bin Laden tracking unit, known as Alex Station.
When was that shut down?
Officially dissolved on July 3rd, 2006.
So, if they still thought he was alive and a major active threat, why disband the specific unit tasked with finding him?
It's presented as circumstantial evidence supporting the idea that perhaps, internally, the belief he was already gone was gaining traction.
And this connects back to the videos?
Directly. The book cites Pakistan's President Asif Ali Zardari Benazir Bhutto's husband speaking in May 2009.
What does he say?
He stated his firm belief that bin Laden had been dead for years. And he mentioned information from U.S. intelligence contacts who apparently hadn't had any solid leads or intercepts from him in 7 years.
7 years. Back from 2009 takes us to late 2002.
Roughly, yes. And if that's true, if there was no credible sign of life after late 2001 or early 2002,
then all those subsequent videos, including the 2004 confession,
would have to be forgeries, according to that logic. That's the implications Zardari was making based on the intelligence picture he described.
This is undermining the whole official timeline. But the source includes an even more specific and frankly explosive claim about his death from Benazir Bhutto herself.
Yes. This is a really startling moment cited in the book. On November 2nd, 2007, Benazir Bhutto was interviewed by David Frost on Al Jazeera.
Okay.
During the interview, she quite casually mentioned that Osama bin Laden had been murdered.
Murdered by whom?
She named Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh. He's known for his conviction, later overturned controversially, in the Daniel Pearl murder, and alleged links to intelligence agencies like Pakistan's ISI and potentially MI6. Bhutto specifically mentioned Sheikh in connection with bin Laden's murder.
Wait, she just dropped that into an interview? That bin Laden was murdered by Omar Sheikh. How did Frost react?
That's another key point the source makes. David Frost apparently didn't follow up on that specific remark. He just moved on.
He didn't ask for clarification. Nothing.
According to the book's account, no. And furthermore, it claims that when Western media outlets later broadcast clips of that interview, that particular statement about bin Laden being murdered by Sheikh was often edited out.
Censored.
Censored. That's extraordinary if true. And Bhutto.
Tragically, Benazir Bhutto was assassinated just 2 months after that interview on December 27, 2007. The timing, the claim, the alleged censorship, and her subsequent death. It's presented as a deeply disturbing sequence of events.
Wow. Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around what this first chapter is presenting based on your summary.
Sure. Essentially, the secret file on 9/11 in its first chapter argues there's a significant disconnect. You have the widely accepted story. Bin Laden did it. He confessed on video. He evaded capture for years, then was finally killed in 2011.
Right, the standard narrative.
But the book contrasts this with initial denials from bin Laden and the Taliban, an FBI confirmation years later of lacking evidence for 9/11 charges, serious doubts about the authenticity and translation of the key confession videos, plus numerous high-level intelligence figures believing he died early on, the quiet disbanding of his tracking unit, and this unpursued, allegedly censored claim from Benazir Bhutto that he was murdered years earlier by someone else entirely.
Exactly. It paints a picture filled with contradictions and unanswered questions right from the start of the post-9/11 era.
So the takeaway isn't necessarily a conclusion, but highlighting the conflict in the evidence itself.
Precisely. The chapter aims to show that the narrative wasn't as straightforward or undisputed, even among officials and intelligence agencies, as it often seemed publicly.
Which leaves us, and you the listener, with a pretty challenging thought to consider, based purely on the information presented in this chapter. If key evidence like the confession videos face credible challenges regarding authenticity and translation, and if numerous intelligence leaders privately or publicly doubted bin Laden, even survived past early 2002, what does that mixture of official denials, disputed evidence, and expert skepticism mean for how solid we consider the foundations of the official 9/11 narrative to be?
It's a heavy question to ponder.
It definitely is. Thank you for joining us on this first step into GEHEIMAKTE 9/11. We really appreciate you being here for this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Join us next time as we continue analyzing the source chapter by chapter. We'll be diving into the next part of the book titled World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7. That promises to be, well, equally detailed. We'll see you then.
Welcome to the deep dive. You gave us a stack of sources that promise a really challenging look at accepted history. And we are ready to take the plunge.
It's fascinating stuff. And the level of, let's say, engineering detail in this particular source is quite striking. Our deep dive today focuses specifically on Chapter 2.
Right.
It's titled World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7, and it's from the book GEHEIMAKTE 9/11 Verschwiegenen Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
Which translates roughly to Secret File 9/11 Concealed Facts of the 9/11 Commission Report. Okay, so let's unpack this chapter then. Its goal seems to be analyzing claims that fundamentally challenge, the official story of how the WTC towers collapsed.
Exactly, focusing on structural integrity, the fires, physical evidence, things the authors feel were maybe overlooked or misinterpreted.
And it's not just WTC 1 and 2, the Twin Towers. It also brings WTC 7 into the same mechanical analysis. 3 buildings.
Yes, 3 massive steel frame structures. And the source systematically contrasts the, let's call it the established narrative, with specific engineering principles and material science findings. It really pushes for a critical look at the official scientific work.
Okay, let's start where the source starts. WTC 1 and 2, the Twin Towers. It brings us right back to the original design specs. These towers, it reminds us, were engineered to withstand impacts from fully fueled Boeing 707s.
And those are heavy planes, up to 155 tons.
Right.
And the analysis here points out that the Boeing 767s that actually struck on 9/11 were lighter than that 707 standard. Plus, they likely weren't fully fueled for the relatively short flights they were on.
So lighter planes, less fuel than the design anticipated.
Yet we have this central contradiction that the source keeps coming back to. Never before 9/11, and actually never since, has a steel-framed high-rise collapse just because of fire. But on that one day, 3 of them dead.
That's a stark claim. So if the design was that robust, the source argues the fire analysis is where the official story starts to, well, wobble. They point to the visuals, dark red flames, lots of black smoke.
Indicating, they argue, lower temperature, oxygen-starved fires.
Right.
The kind you'd expect from burning office stuff, carpets, desks, paper.
Carbon fires.
Not the super hot inferno often depicted.
Well, that's the argument. Kerosene, the jet fuel, burns around 650 Celsius. Now, steel does start losing strength around then, but the key point here is duration. It needs hours of sustained heat.
Okay.
But according to this file, the jet fuel, it would have burned off really quickly. Minutes, not hours. We know people even escaped from floors near the impact zones after the initial event.
And there's even a historical comparison in the same building, right? WTC-1 had a major fire back in 75.
That's right. 6 floors burned for over 3 hours. Serious fire. But the source emphasizes there was no threat to the building's stability. It didn't collapse.
So why did the 9/11 fires cause total collapse, according to the official reports? What's the counter-argument there? That's the core question the source pushes. It mentions the Nagel pancake theory, which apparently didn't hold up well in tests by Underwriters Laboratories, UL.
Okay.
So that was sort of replaced by a warping theory. But both of these explanations, the source argues, need really high, sustained temperatures to significantly weaken that massive inner steel core.
And this is where the source gets quite critical of the official investigations methods. It claims both theories don't really explain the total destruction of that core all the way down.
Right. And it adds another layer, alleging that UL, who did some fire tests, apparently didn't even get access to the official computer simulations run by NIST.
NIST being the National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Correct. And the source goes further, specifically alleging that NIST manipulated its simulation inputs.
Manipulated how?
Well, for example, it claims that for WTC-2, NIST assumed 13 tons of jet fuel, which is apparently double the FAA's recommended 6.5 tons for that specific flight path.
Okay, double the fuel.
And it also claims NIST assumed the fire in WTC-2 burned for 90 minutes, when the actual time was closer to 55 minutes before collapse.
So the implication is they tweaked the inputs to make the simulation match the real-world outcome.
That's certainly what the source suggests, yes.
Yeah.
That the parameters were set to ensure the model collapsed as observed.
Okay, if the fire explanation is challenged, the source then looks at the physics of the collapse itself, the speed, right?
Exactly. The towers fell in about 10 seconds. They were 417 meters tall. That speed is very, very close to free fall in a vacuum.
Meaning what?
Meaning the huge undamaged structure below the impact zone, remember, that was 2/3 of WTC-2 and 5/6 of WTC-1 offered almost no resistance.
It just wasn't there.
Essentially, yes. For something to fall that fast, the structure that's supposed to be resisting the fall has to be removed or neutralized almost instantaneously. That's a fundamental point in this analysis.
And the collapse wasn't just straight down, was it? The source mentions debris.
Huge sections of steel. We're talking 300-ton pieces being thrown outwards, horizontally, up to 100 meters into the neighboring World Financial Center. That outward explosion of energy is hard to square with just gravity pulling things down.
So resistance free fall downwards and explosive force outwards. What about the impact on the ground? The seismic readings.
This is another major point in the source. If those massive towers had hit the ground largely intact, the seismic energy should have been significant. The calculation presented is around 3.7 on the Richter scale.
Which is like what, in explosive terms?
The source equates it to roughly 600 tons of TNT. A huge impact.
Okay, 600 tons expected. But what was actually recorded?
Much, much lower. The seismographs about 34 kilometers away only registered 2.1 for WTC2 and 2.3 for WTC1.
That's tiny in comparison. What does that equate to?
Only about 1 to 3 tons of TNT equivalent. A massive discrepancy.
Wow. So where did all that potential energy go if it didn't hit the ground?
Well, the implication drawn in this chapter is stark. It suggests that something like 90% of the tower's mass must have been pulverized into fine dust while falling before it even hit the ground.
Pulverized midair.
That's the only way, according to this analysis, to explain such a low seismic reading. The potential energy was dissipated differently.
That's quite a claim. Does the source say how the official report explains that energy gap?
According to this file, it doesn't really address it adequately. And this leads straight to a core claim about physics, specifically Newton's third law.
Action and reaction.
Exactly. The source argues this law was basically defied twice. It posits that it's physically problematic for a smaller, falling top section, the hammer, to completely obliterate a much larger, stronger stationary section below the anvil at near free fall speed.
The hammer should break, or at least be slowed down significantly by the anvil.
That's the classical physics expectation, yes. Not pulverize the anvil while continuing downwards almost unimpeded.
Okay, the physics arguments for the Twin Towers are complex. But then we get to WTC-7, the Salomon Brothers building.
Yes, and this one, as the source emphasizes, is perhaps even more puzzling because it wasn't hit by a plane at all.
Right. No impact. Just fires, apparently, for about 7 hours. And then...
it collapsed. Completely. Symmetrically. At, again, virtually free fall speed, 47 stories in about 6.5 seconds.
Were there warnings? Any precursor signs mentioned?
Yes, the source cites witness accounts. People reported hearing a loud sound like a thunderclap and seeing windows shatter on lower floors just seconds before it started to come down around 5:20 p.m.
Okay, so what's the official explanation for WTC-7 if it wasn't impact damage?
The official NIST theory is that it was solely due to fire. The heat supposedly caused one specific internal support column, column 79, to buckle.
Just one column.
Yes, and that failure allegedly triggered a rapid progressive collapse of all the connecting structures described as a collapsing card house effect, a complete structural failure cascade initiated by fire alone.
Has that ever happened before or since with a steel skyscraper?
According to this source, absolutely not. It argues that if the NIST theory for WTC-7 is correct, it sets an incredibly dangerous precedent.
How so?
Well, it would imply that any modern steel-framed skyscraper could potentially suffer a total, instantaneous collapse due to ordinary office fires. If that were true, the authors argue, the entire global construction and insurance industry would have had to react immediately, wouldn't they? Retrofitting buildings, changing codes.
That's a powerful point. The source also mentions the context of WTC-7, right? What was actually in the building.
Yes. It wasn't just any office building. It housed some very sensitive tenants. The CIA, the Secret Service, the Department of Defense, the IRS, the SEC.
SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission.
That's right. And also Mayor Giuliani's multi-million-dollar, heavily fortified emergency command center, the OEM bunker.
Which was designed for exactly this kind of citywide emergency.
Precisely. Bomb-proof, independent air and power. Yet the source notes it was curiously evacuated that day, with emergency management operating from a temporary spot across the street.
Any other anomalies mentioned about WTC-7?
The fire alarm system. It was allegedly placed in test mode for 8 hours on 9/11, which would have prevented any automatic fire alarms from being transmitted.
Convenient timing, the source implies. What about the idea of explosives being involved, which some theories propose? How does the source say NIST handled that?
It claims NIST dismissed the possibility based on sound levels. They apparently set an arbitrary threshold saying it would take loud explosives like RDX, generating 130 to 140 decibels to cut a column.
And since no witnesses reported that specific kind of loud blast?
They ruled out explosives entirely. But the source criticizes this, asking why only focus on loud RDX. It points out there are quieter cutting charges, like thermat. We'll get more into that, but basically, the source argues NIST ignored testimonies or recordings of any explosions sounds quieter than their RDX benchmark, effectively excluding a whole category of possibilities.
And the physical evidence from WTC-7, the steel.
Crucially, the source states that virtually no steel from WTC-7 was saved for independent investigation. It was all removed and recycled very quickly.
Which also meant The source notes the destruction of massive case files stored there by the SEC, Enron, WorldCom, major corporate fraud investigations.
Billions of dollars in potential evidence. Gone. It's a detail the source highlights.
Okay, let's pivot to the material science then. You mentioned thermat. The source delves into the debris itself, doesn't it? Looking for anomalies.
It does. And this is where some of the most, let's say, challenging physical evidence is presented, starting with heat. Extreme heat.
How extreme?
Well, there were numerous reports, including photos, of molten metal flowing and pooling in the debris pile for weeks after 9/11.
Molten metal. Like steel.
Possibly. Steel melts around 1,600 degrees Celsius. That's a temperature, the source argues, impossible to reach and sustain with burning jet fuel or office materials. Those fires just don't get that hot for that long.
And the fires persisted for a long time, too.
For weeks, yes. Underground fires were still burning 8 weeks later, hot enough to melt the soles of recovery workers' boots. That implies temperatures around 600 Celsius even then. The last fires weren't fully out until mid-December.
So sustained, incredibly high temperatures. What does the dust analysis show? The source mentions specific chemicals and elements found.
Right. Multiple independent labs, including the R.J. Lee Group and the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, analyzed the dust. They found things that, according to this source, shouldn't be there.
Like what?
Microscopic spheres of molybdenum. Now, this gets technical, but molybdenum has an extremely high melting point, 2,623 degrees Celsius.
Whoa! Okay, way beyond steel melting point, let alone fire temps.
Exactly. The source argues finding these spheres essentially rules out conventional fires as the primary heat source. You need something much more energetic, much hotter.
And the chemical signature pointed towards thermite.
That's what the analysis suggests. They found significant sulfur residue on steel samples. Sulfur is often added to thermite to make it thermat, which helps cut steel more effectively.
Okay.
The dust also contained tiny iron-rich spheres, droplets consistent with the thermite reaction, along with elements like barium and sulfur again, pointing towards thermat.
So thermite or thermat, what exactly is it?
Thermite is basically iron oxide and aluminum powder. When ignited, it creates an incredibly hot reaction, producing molten iron. Thermat adds sulfur and sometimes other elements to improve its performance, especially for cutting steel.
And then there's nanothermit.
Yes, or superthermit. The source describes this as a much more advanced version, developed, it says, by the U.S. military, like at Lawrence Livermore National Labs. It uses nano-sized particles.
Why not?
It makes the reaction incredibly fast and efficient. So fast, it can behave almost like an explosive, creating high pressure very quickly. And crucially, it can be formulated as a liquid solgel.
A liquid.
Yeah, like a paint or spray.
Yeah.
It can be applied relatively easily and safely, and only becomes reactive or explosive once it dries. The source suggests this could be used to precisely weaken or cut structural steel.
Is there scientific backing for finding this stuff in the dust?
The source points to a specific study published in 2009 in the Open Chemical Physics Journal. It went through peer review.
And what did it find?
It reported finding unreacted, active thermitic material, these characteristic red-gray chips, in multiple independent samples of the WTC dust. This is presented as strong confirmation.
Okay, that's a lot on material science. Let's quickly touch on the last section in this chapter, events happening before the impacts or way down low.
Right. The source revisits witness accounts, but focuses on those who reported explosions at ground level or even in the basement levels, seconds before the planes actually hit the towers.
Before the impacts.
That's what these accounts claim, yes. And also, immediately following the impacts, there were reports of severe injuries deep underground in basement level B1.
Injuries from the building shaking.
The description cited suggests more than just shaking, severe burns, bad fractures, head trauma, consistent perhaps with localized detonations down there, separate from the impacts much higher up.
And the parking garage evidence you mentioned.
Yes, the source describes the state of the underground parking garage, cars completely burned out, tires and other non-metallic parts seemingly evaporated, even some car bodies partially melted.
Again, suggesting extreme heat way below the impact zones.
That's the argument. Heat and potentially concussive forces that are hard to explain solely by the plane impacts and subsequent fires hundreds of feet above.
Okay, so wrapping up this chapter's analysis, what's the big picture it leaves us with?
Well, the source basically lays out a whole catalog of anomalies and contradictions. Collapse speeds that seem to defy physics, seismic data that doesn't match the mass involved, outward forces, extreme temperatures, and specific chemical signatures in the dust.
All things, it argues, that the official reports either don't fully explain or, in some cases, seem to have actively excluded through, let's say, selective data or modeling.
Exactly. So for you, the listener, this deep dive really forces a hard question. When you have these complex, high-stakes events, what happens to the evidence, the data points, the scientific analysis that just doesn't quite fit the neat, established narrative?
It leaves you with a set of claims that really demand a critical look at how the official science was done, doesn't it?
It does. And consider the final provocative thought this chapter implicitly raises. If the official physics is correct, if WTC 1, 2, and especially 7 collapsed solely due to fire in the way described, then shouldn't every similar steel-framed skyscraper built worldwide be considered inherently vulnerable to catastrophic collapse from a simple office fire? It's a precedent, the source argues, that the global construction industry seems to have largely ignored, which is strange if the threat is real.
A very unsettling thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Chapter 2, World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7 from GEHEIMAKTE 9/11.
Next time, we'll continue digging into this source material by analyzing the following chapter, which is titled WTC Complex.
Looking forward to it. Tune in next time.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're opening a door on something that often gets lost in the sheer scale of 9/11 itself. We're looking at the World Trade Center complex, the security, the money, the operations right before the attacks.
Yeah, the details that maybe didn't make the headlines or, weren't in the main reports.
Exactly. We're digging into facts, procedural things, anomalies that seem to have been, well, overlooked or downplayed.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we're focusing our analysis on Chapter 3 of a German book called GEHEIMAKTE 9/11, Verschwiegene Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
Okay.
The chapter is titled WTC Complex, and it gathers these often overlooked details about who owned what, the security systems, some really odd operational changes just before 9/11, and how evidence was handled afterwards.
So our mission today is basically to lay out these facts from the source, connect some dots maybe.
Precisely. To stitch them together for you, let you see the pattern the source presents.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with security. The actual security setup for the WTC. You'd think for such a major target.
Absolutely. You'd expect top-tier, heavily scrutinized security.
But the source points towards a company with some, well, pretty deep political ties.
It does. The company responsible for security across the entire WTC complex, and this is interesting, also Dulles International Airport, where Flight 77 took off from.
Ah, okay, both locations.
Both locations. The firm was StratSec. They used to be called Securicom.
StratSec. And the people involved. The names are quite familiar.
Very familiar. One director at StratSec, formerly Securicom, was Marvin P. Bush.
President George W. Bush's brother.
That's the one. He was on the board from 1993 right up to 2000.
And the timing there is significant, isn't it, regarding the security system itself?
It is, because the new WTC security system was installed between 1996 and 2000, so essentially under his directorship.
Wow. So the president's brother was a director of the company installing the security for the towers right up until the year before the attack.
Correct, and the connections don't stop there. The CEO from 1999 to 2002.
Let me guess. Another familiar name.
Wirt D. Walker III. A cousin of the former president.
Okay, so family connections are clear. But what about the company's actual power, its contracts?
Right. This is important context. StratSec had a specific contract with the GSA, the General Services Administration.
The government, sort of. Landlord and manager?
Pretty much. And this GSA contract, it allowed StratSec to take on classified or high-risk security jobs for agencies like the Department of Defense, Department of Justice,
right,
without needing to go through the standard competitive bidding process.
So less oversight. They could just get these high-security contracts directly.
Essentially, yes. Less standard vetting, less public accountability than you might expect for a company handling security at places like the WTC or Dulles. It raises questions, according to the source, about the system they installed and managed.
So a politically connected company handling security at the target and a departure airport with special contract privileges.
Okay.
For now, let's shift to what was actually happening on the ground at the WTC in the weeks just before 9/11. The source suggests things got strange.
That's putting it mildly. The source compiles reports from WTC employees describing a systematic lowering of security.
How so?
For instance, there were apparently unusual evacuation drills in the weeks leading up, Okay, maybe explainable. But then, starting September 6th, just 5 days before the attacks, the main security alarm system for the WTC was reportedly lifted. Deactivated?
Wait, the alarm system turned off 5 days before?
That's what the source claims employees reported. And it wasn't just the electronic systems.
What else?
The physical security, too. Bomb-sniffing dogs. Remember the 1993 bombing? Since then, dogs sweeping the complex were a daily routine.
Right, a constant presence.
Well, reports cited indicate those dogs were taken out of service also starting September 6th.
The same day the alarm system was supposedly lifted.
Exactly the same time frame. It feels coordinated, not accidental, like neutralizing layers of security.
Here's where it gets really interesting. So alarms off, dogs gone.
Yeah.
But then came the weekend, right before Tuesday, September 11th.
Ah, yes, the power shutdown. This wasn't a surprise outage. The Port Authority, which ran the complex, had announced it 3 weeks earlier. A total power shutdown for the entire complex over that weekend.
And the effect of that?
Complete security blackout, no video surveillance recording, no electronic entrance controls on the doors.
So anyone could open any door?
Essentially, yes. Any door could be opened without triggering an alarm or being recorded. A total free-for-all, security-wise.
And while this is happening, what are people seeing?
Witnesses reported seeing numerous handymen, guys with big toolboxes carrying spools of cable, coming and going all weekend.
And the official reason for shutting down power and all this activity?
The Port Authority's explanation was installation of new internet cables, just upgrading the network infrastructure.
In the middle of a complete security blackout. The source finds that explanation a bit thin.
Highly inadequate is how the source frames it, given the timing and the security implications.
Okay, let's pivot to the money angle, because the financial context surrounding the towers is, well, significant. We have to talk about asbestos.
Yes, this is a huge factor, often left out of the immediate 9/11 narrative. Way back in 1989, the Port Authority, the owner back then, got an expert report. It told them that properly removing all the asbestos in the towers would cost about $1 billion. With a B.
$1 billion just for asbestos cleanup. That's a massive liability hanging over the buildings.
A staggering potential expense. And, of course, the destruction of the towers on 9/11 completely eliminated the need for that $1 billion investment.
So that problem just vanished.
Financially speaking, yes.
And there was also some work done on fire protection.
Yes. The source mentions unusual fire protection renovations happening between 1999 and 2000 in Towers 1 and 2.
Okay.
But the really specific claim in the source is that this renovation work took place exactly on the floors where the planes would later hit.
Wow. That's precise.
It's a very specific claim about structural work in the impact zones, presented as circumstantial but significant.
But the biggest financial piece has to be Larry Silverstein, right? The man who leased the towers.
Absolutely. Just 6 weeks before the attacks, July 24th, 2001, he signs a 99-year lease for the complex.
6 weeks. And what were the key terms of that lease, according to the source?
Well, crucially, he insured the entire complex, specifically against terrorist attacks.
Okay.
And maybe even more importantly, the contract gave him the sole exclusive rights to rebuild on the site if the towers were destroyed.
So, lease signed, insurance against terrorism taken out, rebuilding rights secured, all just weeks before 9/11.
That's the sequence the source lays out. And after the attacks, this led to a major legal battle.
Over the insurance payout.
Yes. Silverstein sued the insurers, including Swiss Re. His argument was that the two planes hitting the two towers constituted two separate terrorist attacks.
Or not one event, but two. So he wanted double the payout.
Exactly. He sued for double the insured amount.
And did he get it?
The courts eventually agreed with his interpretation. The total payout was around $4.6 billion.
$4.6 billion. Compared to his initial investment in the lease.
Which was reportedly only about $14 million.
$14 million investment, $4.6 billion payout. That's quite a return.
A remarkable outcome. The source also notes the later rebuilding, the Freedom Tower complex, cost around $2 billion, with projected daily rental income around $500,000.
Okay, the financial incentives are stark. Now, what about the physical evidence after the collapse? This part of the source material is genuinely shocking. Let's start with the gold.
Right. There were huge gold reserves stored in vaults beneath the WTC, about $950 million worth in total, belonging to places like COMEX, the Commodities Exchange, and the Bank of Nova Scotia.
Nearly $1 billion in gold. How much did they say they recovered?
Mayor Giuliani announced on November 1st, 2001, that about $230 million worth had been recovered.
So, What happened to the rest?
That's $720 million in gold that has, according to the source, simply been missing since 9/11. Vanished.
720 million.
Wow.
Okay, what about the steel? The actual debris from the towers. Surely that was crucial evidence for investigators.
You would absolutely think so. But the way its removal was handled, as described in the source, sounds highly unusual.
How so?
4 subcontractors were hired very quickly after 9/11. Their job was to retrieve the steel, load it onto trucks, and ship it overseas immediately, like straight away.
Shipped overseas, not kept for forensic analysis.
So the vast majority, yes. And the operation was tightly controlled. Every truck had a GPS tracker. The recovery sites were guarded 247 by heavily armed 3-person teams.
Guarded from whom? Who wasn't allowed access?
This is key. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, was explicitly denied access to the site. They couldn't collect their own samples for analysis.
FEMA was blocked from the site. That seems counterintuitive for a disaster scene.
Deeply counterintuitive. Think about any major investigation you preserve evidence. Here, the source describes a rapid, controlled removal and destruction.
How much steel are we talking about?
Between November 2001 and April 2002, about 185,000 tons of steel were removed. Only around 150 selected pieces were kept back for the official investigation.
150 pieces out of 185,000 tons. The rest just gone.
Shipped away, mostly for scrap, preventing independent analysis.
This lack of access, the rush to dispose of evidence, it leads right into the black box controversy, doesn't it?
It does. This is a major contradiction highlighted by the source. There were reports from recovery workers, people actually on the pile, who stated they found at least 3 of the 4 black boxes from Flights 11 and 175, the planes that hit the towers, and that these recovered boxes were confiscated by the FBI.
So boots on the ground reports saying they were found. But the official story?
The official 9/11 Commission report states that no black boxes from those flights were recovered at the WTC site.
None. That's highly unusual for a plane crash on land, isn't it?
Extremely unusual. Unless a plane crashes in very deep water, recovering the black boxes is almost always successful. They're designed to survive impacts and fires.
So, if the witness reports are accurate, why would the official investigation deny finding them? What information was potentially lost or suppressed?
Well, the black boxes record cockpit voice conversations and all the flight data recorder inputs, every switch flipped, every control movement.
And there were reports about pre-takeoff communications.
Yes. The source mentions reports from air traffic control staff about Flights 11 and 175. These suggested radio communications indicating hijackers were already in the cockpits before the planes even took off.
Before takeoff.
That's the claim. If true, that chatter, that whole sequence, would have been captured on the cockpit voice recorder right from engine start. Vital evidence about how and when the hijacking really began.
Okay, fine. Let's touch on a couple of timeline points from the day itself, September 11th. First, bomb threats.
Yeah, CNN reported bomb threats coming into air traffic control centers that morning. Boston Center, handling the WTC flights, got one around 8:45 a.m. Cleveland Center, handling Flight 93, got one around 9:36 a.m.
Adding chaos to an already chaotic situation for air traffic controllers.
Exactly. Imagine trying to sort out hijackings while also dealing with bomb threats targeting your facility. Massive confusion potential.
And the other timeline issue involves the president himself down in Florida.
Right. The delay in moving the president from the elementary school. His schedule being at that school was public knowledge since September 7th.
So the location was known.
Yes. And after the second plane hit the South Tower, confirming a major terrorist attack was underway, standard Secret Service protocol is immediate evacuation. Get the president to Air Force One, secure location, now.
But that didn't happen immediately.
No. The presidential motorcade didn't leave the school until 9:34 a.m. That's 32 minutes after the Twin Tower was hit. A significant delay that seems to ignore established safety protocols during a confirmed attack.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean when you pull together all these threads from the source concerning the WTC complex? The security firm with its deep political ties and special contracts. The security systems being strangely degraded just days before. The alarms off, the dogs gone, the weekend power down allowing unchecked access. Then you add the huge financial angle, the asbestos liability vanishing, the Silverstein lease and insurance payout, and then layer on the evidence handling the missing gold, the rapid disposal of the steel, FEMA being blocked, the conflicting black box reports.
It paints a very different picture.
It paints a picture, according to this source, that's less about random failures and more about potentially systemic anomalies. Actions that seem to hinder investigation while benefiting certain parties financially or logistically. It points away from standard procedures and towards something much more controlled, perhaps.
It's definitely a lot to take in. We've covered the security web, those strange pre-9/11 operational changes, the powerful financial currents, and the really questionable handling of evidence.
And maybe the final thought to leave you with, something to mull over, is this. Given an attack of such unprecedented scale, why did so many standard protocols seem to break down?
You mean protocols for evidence preservation?
For evidence, like the steel and the black boxes, yes. But also protocols for presidential safety. Why, according to the source material, were these established procedures apparently ignored or actively overridden at critical moments?
The deeply troubling question to consider. And we are not done with this book yet.
Not at all.
In our next deep dive, we'll continue working through GEHEIMAKTE 9/11, moving on to the next chapter. It's titled Foreknowledge,
which translates roughly to prior knowledge or foreknowledge. We'll be looking at what the source claims certain people or agencies might have known before the attacks happened.
That sounds essential. Make sure you join us for that.
Join us next time.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again, digging into the sources, trying to piece things together for you. Today, we're tackling something pretty specific and, frankly, quite complex. The money trail around September 11th of 2001.
That's right.
Specifically, we're doing a deep dive into Chapter 4 of the book GEHEIMAKTE 9/11 Verschiedene Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports. The chapter title is Foreknowledge, which translates to prior knowledge.
In this chapter, it zeroes in entirely on, well, financial red flags. We're looking at what the source claims were huge, really fast profits made from trades placed just before and even during the attacks.
It suggests, a kind of insight into what was coming.
Exactly. A level of precision that the source argues just shouldn't exist in normal market behavior.
Okay, so let's start with the basics here. What's the financial mechanism the source focuses on?
It's all about something called put options. There was apparently a massive and very unusual spike in trading these.
Right. So for anyone listening who isn't like a Wall Street trader, what is a PUT option, simply put?
Basically, buying a PUT option gives you the right, but not the obligation, to sell a stock at a set price by a certain date. So if you buy PUTs, you're betting heavily that the stock's price is about to tank. Really tank.
A bit on disaster for that specific company.
Precisely. A high-stakes bet on a sharp decline.
And the source claims this wasn't just general market jitters.
No, not at all, according to this book. The really striking thing highlighted is how targeted this activity was. It wasn't spread out. It focused sharply on, well, the airline companies whose planes were used in the attacks and the insurance companies that would face massive payouts.
Okay, so highly specific targets. What kind of numbers does the source use to back this up, this claim of targeting?
Well, it points directly at American Airlines and United Airlines. Their planes were the ones hijacked. The book states that PUT options on their stocks specifically jumped up by 40 percentage points in the weeks leading up to 9/11.
40%. That's a huge shift in sentiment for just two airlines.
It is. And the source presents this as, a major anomaly.
Did they find any, normal explanation? A big strike, maybe? Or some regulatory news that hit just those two?
The source argues no. To emphasize the point, it contrasts that 40% figure with the rest of the airline sector. Apparently, options trading for other major airlines only went up by about 11% in the same time frame.
Okay, so 40 versus 11. That does suggest something specific was expected for American and United, not just general airline trouble.
That's the argument presented, yes. A very precise focus.
And you said insurance companies, too. Makes sense. They'd be hit hard financially.
Exactly. The source details similar unusual PUT option activity for major insurers. It names Swiss Re. Specifically, they insured the World Trade Center towers, also AXA, and Munich Re, which the book notes is the world's biggest reinsurance company. They were all set to lose enormous amounts of money.
Mm-hmm. Huge liabilities.
Massive.
Now, the source brings this down to a specific example, right, to make it less abstract.
It does. It mentions an anecdote about Swiss Re involving Cindy McCain, the wife of Senator John McCain. The claim in the book is that her tax return reportedly showed multi-million-dollar profits. Profits from buying PUT options on Swiss Re stock just before it plummeted. Swiss Re lost over 30% of its value very quickly after the attacks.
Okay, we absolutely need to stress here, we're just relaying the claim made in the source material. We're not verifying it, just reporting what the book says to illustrate the point.
Absolutely. It's presented as an example of the kind of rapid, massive profits potentially made by someone with prior knowledge. So moving from the targets to the sheer scale of this trading, where was this happening? The source mentions specific institutions.
Yeah, this volume data seems critical. It shifts the focus from maybe a few lucky guesses to something more organized, maybe high finance level stuff.
Well, look at the numbers the source cites for transaction volume. At a major firm like Morgan Stanley, which, remember, had offices in the World Trade Center, the daily average of PUT option trades reportedly went from about 27 a day.
Okay, 27?
To 2,157 per day, right before the attacks.
Wow. Okay, that's, what is that, nearly 80 times the normal volume, specifically betting against their own stock, essentially.
That's what the figures suggest. And it wasn't just Morgan Stanley. At Merrill Lynch, another giant, the average went from around 252 trades a day to 12,215 a day.
12,000, that's astronomical. The signals weren't exactly subtle then.
No. According to the source, the market was practically screaming that something bad was expected, at least in these specific areas, like large-scale disaster hedging.
Which brings us to maybe the most statistically shocking bit in this chapter, the ratios. The bets for a price drop versus bets against it.
Yeah, the Chicago Board Options Exchange data, specifically for September 6th to 10th, 2001, if you look at the ratio of QUT options, the bets on the stock falling versus kilo options, bets on it rising, the numbers for those targeted airlines are just completely upside down compared to normal market activity.
Okay, give us the numbers for United Airlines.
For United, the source says there were 4,744 PUT contracts traded, betting it would fall, compared to only 396 call contracts betting it would rise.
So more than, almost 12 to 1. A 12 to 1 ratio betting on a crash for United right before 9/11.
Exactly. And American Airlines, very similar story according to the source. 4,516 PUTs versus just 748 calls.
Again, heavily skewed towards predicting a fall.
Hugely skewed. The book quotes professional traders from the time saying they were just floored. They'd never seen anything like it in their entire career.
You can imagine that level of one-sided betting on disaster, focused so precisely. That's what really fuels the prior knowledge argument in the source, isn't it?
It's central to it, yes. The combination of the targeting, the immense volume increase, and these completely skewed ratios.
And the source puts a total dollar figure on all this suspicious activity.
It estimates the total scope of these trades at around 15 billion US dollars.
15 billion. Okay. Given that scale, what was the immediate reaction from, say, financial authorities around the world?
Well, initially, the source says there was significant alarm and investigation. It specifically highlights Germany's central bank, the Bundesbank. They did an internal study, apparently, and their chief at the time, Ernst Weltach, went public around September 23rd, 2001.
Yeah, what did he say?
According to the source, he stated there were clear signs that activities on international financial markets could only have been carried out with insider knowledge. He even reportedly concluded there was, and this is a direct quote mentioned in the book, irrefutable proof of insider trading.
Irrefutable proof. That's incredibly strong language coming from the head of the German central bank.
Extremely strong. And the source notes, Germany wasn't alone. A whole list of countries apparently launched insider trading investigations right away.
Like who?
Belgium, France, the UK, Switzerland, Italy, Japan, Luxembourg, Monte Carlo, Cyprus. Quite a few.
So a major international financial probe seemed to be kicking off, driven by this data.
It certainly looked that way initially, but then, according to the source, things took a very sharp turn.
How so?
Well, the book points out a major contradiction. Just 2 weeks, 14 days after the Bundesbank chief made that irrefutable proof statement, the British government reportedly issued its own finding. And their conclusion, starkly different.
What did they say?
They declared there was no indication of insider trading or manipulation of financial markets.
Oh, okay. So from irrefutable proof in Germany to no indication from the UK in just 2 weeks. That seems remarkably fast for such a complex global investigation.
The speed of that turnaround is definitely presented as a key point of suspicion in the book, yes.
And the financial intrigue, it doesn't stop with options trading, does it? The source brings up data recovery, too.
Right. This involves actual cash transfers and a German data recovery company called Convar Deutschland GmbH.
What do they do?
After the towers collapsed, they were apparently tasked with recovering data from damaged hard drives found in the wreckage. They managed to restore data from 32 server hard drives.
Okay, what did they find on those drives?
Something pretty explosive, according to the source. They found evidence of massive sums of money being transferred over 100 million US dollars.
Transferred when?
Just before the planes hit, and even during the attacks themselves, while the disaster was unfolding.
How would that even work?
Well, the source includes the interpretation from the Convar analysts themselves, they stated. There is suspicion that some people knew the approximate time of the impacts beforehand, as they appeared to be purposefully moving large sums of money, hoping that these transactions could no longer be traced after the mainframe servers were destroyed.
So the idea being, get the money out electronically, right when the physical infrastructure holding the records is about to be obliterated, a kind of digital getaway during the chaos.
That's the suspicion raised by the data recovery findings, as presented in the book, Wiping the Audit Trail Clean.
Okay, so let's recap here. The source presents evidence of unprecedented trading volumes at top firms, ratio skewed 12-to-1 betting on disaster for specific airlines, the head of a major European central bank declaring irrefutable proof of insider trading, and data recovery specialists finding $100 million being moved during the attacks, possibly to erase the transaction history.
That's a fair summary of the key points raised in this chapter, yes.
So given all of that, what was the final official conclusion reached in the U.S. about all this financial activity? What did the 9/11 Commission report say?
The source points us directly to the 9/11 Commission report, specifically page 499 in their analysis, and the conclusion reported there, according to this book's interpretation. Basically, yes, there was unusual trading, but every single transaction had an innocent explanation.
Every single one. So it was all just coincidence, despite the scale, the targeting and timing, the Bundesbank, the Convair data.
That was the official finding, as presented by the source. Coincidence. No link to prior knowledge of the attacks.
That is a difficult conclusion to square with the data points this chapter lays out. That 40% jump, the 12-to-1 ratios, the $100 million transfers, all innocent, unrelated events.
And that's precisely the core tension the author of GEHEIMAKTE 9/11 wants you, the listener, to wrestle with. You have this mountain of data suggesting highly informed, profitable activity targeting the victims, versus the official verdict saying, essentially, nothing to see here.
The source includes a quote that kind of sums up that dissonance, doesn't it, from a Bloomberg analyst?
Yes, Dylan Ratigan from Bloomberg Business News. His commentary is highlighted.
What did he say?
He reportedly said, this would be one of the most extraordinary coincidences in human history if it were a coincidence.
Extraordinary coincidence. That puts it mildly, maybe. So we'll leave you with that thought to chew on. How do you reconcile these massive, specific financial anomalies, the kind that led Germany's central bank to suspect irrefutable proof, with the official conclusion that it was all just random chance? What odds would make every suspicious trade innocent?
It's a significant question raised by the material in this chapter.
Definitely something to think about. Join us next time as we continue our deep dive into GEHEIMAKTE 9/11.
Yeah, next time we're shifting gears a bit. We'll move away from finance and look at the operational side of things on the day itself. We'll be digging into the next chapter, which is titled Militärische Übungen, that translates to military exercises.
Sounds intriguing. Okay, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll talk to you soon.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got some really interesting source material shared by you, the listener, that we're digging into today.
That's right. We're focusing specifically on Chapter 5 of the book GEHEIMAKTE 9/11, Verschwiegene Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
And that chapter title?
It's Militärische Übungen, which, just translates to military exercises.
Okay, so our mission today is to explore these military exercises, the ones happening leading up to, and critically, on the actual day of 9/11.
Exactly. We want to understand the operational environment, what the U.S. military was actually doing simulation-wise.
Right, because we're not just talking about, general readiness levels here. The source material points to a, frankly, staggering number of very specific simulations, war games, basically.
Running at the same time as the real attacks were unfolding.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core issue presented here seems to be complexity. What happens when your emergency response systems are already busy running simulations, especially simulations that look a lot like the real thing?
That's the crucial point. So what? Think about it. Multiple complex simulation scenarios running at the same time as a genuine, massive emergency.
How does that impact things on the ground?
Well, it creates enormous potential for confusion. Command centers are always trying to filter the signal from the noise, right? Distinguished practice targets phantoms from real threats.
Okay.
Now, imagine dozens of these phantoms on the screens because of exercises, alongside real emergency signals. According to this source, that's exactly the environment they faced. It could lead to delays, misidentification.
Catastrophic confusion, potentially.
Potentially, yes. And the sources suggest this wasn't just random bad luck. There were exercises in the months before 9/11 that seemed eerily specific.
Right. Let's get into those specifics. What happened before the day itself?
Well, the book details a pattern. For instance, there was an exercise called Mescal.
Mescal. When was this?
This was conducted back on October 24, 2000, so about 11 months before the attacks.
Okay, 11 months prior. And what was the scenario for Mescal?
This is where it gets quite pointed. The simulation was for a Boeing 757 crashing directly into the Pentagon.
A Boeing 757, the same type of plane that actually hit the Pentagon.
According to the source material, yes. The exact same aircraft type simulated hitting that specific target.
Wow, okay. That level of detail does seem notable looking back. It's not just a generic plane crash drill.
No, it suggests a very specific focus, even back then. And this pattern apparently continued closer to the date.
What happened as we got closer, say, into the summer of 2001?
Then we see the Amalgam Virgo exercises, Amalgam Virgo 1st and Amalgam Virgo 2. These ran over 2 days, June 1st and 2nd, 2001.
So just about 3 months before 9/11, what was simulated this time?
Again, quite specific targets. These drills simulated the hijacking and crash of 1 or possibly 2 aircraft onto the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C.
The Capitol building. So first, a simulation hitting the military HQ, the Pentagon, then the legislative HQ, the Capitol.
Exactly. And again, the source mentions specific aircraft types used in the simulation, a Boeing 757 and a C-9.
What's fascinating here, as the source lays it out, is this focus on using commercial airliners as weapons against major government buildings.
Absolutely. The consistency is striking the Pentagon, the Capitol, hijacked planes. It really indicates that this type of threat was being actively war-gamed by the military in the lead-up.
Okay, so that sets the stage. The military was practicing for scenarios involving planes hitting key D.C. targets. But then we get to the day itself, September 11th.
Right.
And here's where it gets really interesting, according to this chapter. Because it wasn't just business as usual or even heightened alert. The claim is the operational environment was swamped.
Completely flooded is the picture painted. The source states there were 4 major war or emergency exercises planned or actually running on September 11th, plus several others.
4 major ones simultaneously.
That's the claim. Let's break them down. The first one, and maybe the most relevant for air defense, was Vigilant Guardian.
Okay, Vigilant Guardian. Who ran that and what was it about?
This was initiated by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and NORAD. That's the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the U.S.-Canada Joint Command for Air Defense.
Right.
And the scenario they were running that morning, simulating multiple aircraft hijackings across the northern part of the U.S.
Wait. So NORAD was running a simulation of exactly what started happening in reality, multiple hijackings in the U.S. airspace.
Precisely that scenario, yes.
You'd think that would make the response faster, wouldn't you, if they're already in that mindset?
Logically, yes. But here's where the second exercise comes in and complicates things massively. Northern Vigilance.
Northern Vigilance. What did that involve?
This was a separate, large drill. It actually required fighter jets to be deployed, physically moved, way up north to Canada and Alaska.
Okay, why?
To track simulated incoming threats, these phantoms we talked about appearing on radar screens as part of that exercise.
Right, the phantoms. Explain that again. How do these exercise phantoms actually work and why are they confusing?
So in these big NORAD drills, they inject electronic signals into the live radar systems. These look like real aircraft tracks to the controllers.
Okay.
The point is to test the whole chain detection identification response. Controllers can't just ignore blips mark exercise because sorting through them is the exercise. They need to figure out which phantom belongs to which drill, which procedures to follow.
So Northern Vigilance is putting dozens of these fake blips onto the radar screens that controllers are watching.
Exactly. Dozens of them, all over the place in northern airspace. Now imagine you're a controller. You're already dealing with these exercise phantoms from Northern Vigilance. Then you start getting reports of actual hijackings, which might initially look like more exercise inputs or just unclear data.
I see. It muddies the waters completely. How do you tell what's real when the system is deliberately filled with fakes?
That's the core problem highlighted. It makes distinguishing the genuine threats incredibly difficult, and, crucially, it introduces delay. Minutes lost trying to figure out what's real, what's exercise.
That paints a picture of, well, operational chaos, almost by design. Okay, that's 2. What was the third major exercise mentioned? Tripod 2.
Correct. Tripod 2 is slightly different because it wasn't fully active on the morning of the 11th, but it was in the final stages of preparation and setup. It was scheduled to run the next day, September 12th.
And where was this exercise supposed to happen?
This is another point the source emphasizes. The command post for Tripod 2 was being set up, or was already set up, right there in New York City, specifically in World Trade Center Building 7, WTC 7.
WTC 7. That's the other large building that collapsed later that day near the Twin Towers.
That's the one. So you had a major emergency command center being established right next door to Ground Zero.
And what was Tripod 2 supposed to simulate?
A biological weapons attack on New York City.
So let me get this straight. On the morning of 9/11, personnel and equipment were potentially already in place in WTC 7, preparing to simulate a massive bioattack on the city for the next day, while blocks away, the actual attack was unfolding.
That's the situation described. A pre-positioned emergency management exercise hub right at the edge of the disaster zone, focused on a different kind of catastrophe, layer upon layer of crisis, real and simulated.
Unbelievable complexity.
Hey.
And the fourth major one?
The fourth one listed was reportedly run by the CIA.
The CIA had its own exercise.
Apparently so. And the scenario for this simulation, an airplane crashing into the CIA's own headquarters building in Langley, Virginia.
Oh yeah, the pattern just keeps repeating. Plane crash simulations into high-profile targets. Pentagon, Capitol, CIA headquarters, all discussed or active around or on 9/11 itself.
It certainly creates a strong theme in the source material. The question it raises is, when you see a real event matching your simulation, how does that affect your reaction? Does it cause hesitation? Do you assume it's part of the drill at first?
It's hard to imagine the cognitive load on the people in those command centers. Now, coordinating even just these 4 huge exercises, Vigilant Guardian, Northern Vigilance, Tripod 2 Second, the CIA drill that sounds like a massive undertaking, who was overseeing all this?
Good question. The sources indicate this wasn't just a random collection of drills. Most of them fell under a large-scale, regularly scheduled military operation.
Run by whom?
Led primarily by the U.S. Strategic Command, STRATCOM. They're responsible for things like strategic deterrence, global strike, nuclear ops. A major command.
Okay.
And they were coordinating this with other key players like U.S. Space Command and, of course, NORAD. So this was, according to the book, a pre-planned, very high-level, system-wide stress test.
It wasn't just those 4 either, was it? The chapter mentions others.
That's right. It wasn't limited to those 4. To really get a sense of the density, the source also lists several other exercises ongoing that morning under STRATCOM's umbrella.
Like what?
Names like Vigilant Warrior, Crown Vigilance, Apollo Guardian, and Amalgam Warrior are mentioned.
Wow. So add those to the list. We're talking maybe 8, 9, potentially 10 significant military or emergency simulations all happening concurrently or in immediate prep on the morning of 9/11.
That's the picture painted by this chapter, yes. Hijackings, plane crashes into specific buildings, bioattacks, phantom threats on radar, all swirling around at the same time as the real events.
It does make the operational environment sound less like ready and more like saturated or even conflicted.
Exactly. If we try to connect this to the bigger picture for you, the listener, the key takeaway from this chapter seems to be that saturation level.
Right.
On the day of 9/11, the claim is the U.S. military's operational space was, you could almost say, intentionally filled with simulations that mirrored, in uncanny ways sometimes, the very attacks that were actually happening.
It wasn't just background noise. It was specific thematic noise.
Precisely. This wasn't just a random list of code names. The source presents it as evidence of an operational environment that, while designed to test limits, may have inadvertently created blind spots or sown confusion when reality hit.
So what does this all mean then? When we boil it down, the primary finding from this part of the source material is, well, it's the sheer number and the specific nature of these military drills running at the same time as the attacks.
The volume and the specificity.
It's almost difficult to process the level of coincidence or operational conflict that this chapter is suggesting occurred that morning.
It definitely leaves you with a pretty significant question to think about, something for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. If your whole system, your command and control, your operators, are heavily trained to look for and react to phantoms and simulated threats, how much does the sheer complexity and realism of that training environment potentially hinder the ability to recognize and react decisively when the threat isn't a phantom?
Did the noise of the training unintentionally mask the signal of the real attack? Delay the response?
That's the provocative thought this chapter leaves you with. How much did the training drills themselves impact the real-time capability on that specific day?
It's a fascinating and, frankly, quite unsettling perspective presented in this source. We really appreciate you sharing these materials with us. We've tried to break down what's quite a complex set of claims here.
Definitely a lot to consider. And we'll continue digging into this particular source.
Yes, absolutely. For our next deep dive, we'll be moving right along to the next chapter in GEHEIMAKTE 9/11. That chapter is titled Das Pentagon, Flug 77.
Looking into the specific events surrounding the Pentagon attack as detailed in the book.
Exactly. So we'll analyze the information presented there in our next session. Thanks for tuning into this deep dive. We hope breaking down this chapter has given you some valuable context, or at least some things to think about regarding the operational environment that day.
Until next time.
Stay curious and keep digging.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again to give you that customized analysis, really getting into the details of the specific source materials you provide.
Exactly. We're not just scratching the surface. Today we're digging into a very specific text.
Right. So what's on the agenda for this deep dive?
We are tackling Chapter 6, which is titled Pentagon, Flug 77. It's from the book GEHEIMAKTE 9/11 für Schwiegen Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
Okay, GEHEIMAKTE 9/11, and the focus is Flight 77 hitting the Pentagon.
Precisely. Our mission is to neutrally examine the facts and, importantly, the discrepancies that the authors highlight concerning the events at the Pentagon on 9/11.
Got it. So this chapter, it sounds like it really pushes back against the official story on several fronts. Physical evidence, flight capabilities, even command decisions.
It definitely does. It raises some pretty challenging questions based on the information presented in the book.
All right. So the core question we're exploring, based on this source, is how do the reported physical facts stack up against the, well, frankly, incredible flight maneuver described? Let's get into it.
Okay, first up is the physical evidence at the scene. Or maybe the lack of it.
What do you mean lack of it?
Well, the book claims that essentially no major aircraft debris was found. We're talking large components, the engines, the landing gear, things you'd expect to survive even a major crash.
Especially engines, right? Aren't they built to be incredibly tough?
Exactly. The source points out they're made of steel titanium alloys, stuff with melting points over 3,000 degrees Celsius. They shouldn't just disappear.
So what was the official explanation for where they went, according to the book?
The book mentions that NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, initially floated the idea that the aircraft basically evaporated on impact.
Evaporated. A whole Boeing 757.
Yeah, that was the initial word reported in the source. Now, the book notes this specific claim was later withdrawn.
Okay, but was there a replacement explanation?
That's the point the source makes. It argues no clear, scientifically sound explanation for the missing heavy debris really took its place.
Okay, let's talk about the hole. A Boeing 757 is huge. Wingspan is what, nearly 40 meters?
38 meters, yeah. But the reported impact hole in the Pentagon wall was only about 5 meters wide.
5. How does a 38-meter plane fit through a 5-meter hole?
Well, according to the book, NIST's explanation for that was the theory of folded wings.
Folded wings, like they just neatly tucked in on impact.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
The idea presented, as the book describes it, was that the wings folded inwards and then somehow vanished into that small hole along with the rest of the plane. The authors find this very difficult to accept from a physics standpoint.
I can see why that would raise questions. What about visual evidence? Cameras.
Ah, yes. The book states there are 86 video recordings from around the Pentagon, gas stations, hotels, security gates, all confiscated by the FBI right after the event.
86. And how many were released?
Only 3. released years later in 2006. And the key point the book makes is that none of them actually show a Boeing 757.
No plane. What do they show then?
Just a trail of white smoke, apparently, and then the explosion.
White smoke. Is that typical for a 757?
The book specifically claims it's not. It says those engines don't produce white smoke like that. So another anomaly, according to the source.
Okay, so missing debris, a tiny hole, and no clear video footage. Let's shift to the flight itself. The maneuver described sounds extreme.
Extremely. The book lays it out. A 270-degree turn at 850 kilometers per hour. Then, immediately leveling out to fly for a kilometer, just 6 meters, that's barely treetop height above the ground, holding that constant speed.
6 meters off the deck at 850 clicks. Who could fly like that?
That's exactly the question the source poses. It argues this is virtually impossible for an amateur pilot. The book even claims an expert pilot, someone with over 1,000 flight hours, might need 10 tries to nail that kind of high-speed, low-altitude precision maneuver.
And the speed itself. 850 kilometers or near sea level. Is that even possible for a 757?
Well, the book cites the manufacturer's data. The maximum allowed speed for a 757 or 767 down low, where the air is dense, is around 680 kilometers per hour.
So 850 is way over the limit. What should happen if you exceed that VMO, that maximum operating speed?
Physics dictates, according to the source, that the aerodynamic forces become immense. The aircraft should experience structural failure. Basically, it ought to break apart.
So the book's argument is that a standard airliner can't physically do what was reported.
Correct. The source suggests those kinds of speeds and ground-hugging maneuvers are more in the realm of, say, military aircraft or missiles, not a civilian jetliner.
Okay, what about the flight recorder, the black box? Does it back up this flight path?
Here's where it gets really tricky, according to the book. The NTSB released the data in 2007. But the source highlights a critical issue.
What's that?
The data recording just stops. It cuts out 2.5 kilometers before the Pentagon.
It just ends. Mid-flight.
Mid-flight.
Yeah.
And at 850 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers is less than 2 seconds of flight time. So the last couple of seconds are just missing from the data.
What was the plane doing right before the data cut out?
According to the source, the last recorded altitude was 83 meters. The Pentagon itself is only 21 meters tall.
So in those missing 2 seconds, it had to drop over 60 meters and level out perfectly to hit the ground floor.
Precisely. A 60-meter dive and stabilization to a horizontal path, just meters off the ground, in under 2 seconds. The book flatly states this is physically impossible for a Boeing 757.
Wow. Is there anything else significant from the black box data mentioned in the source?
Yes, one very pointed detail. The cockpit door status.
What about it?
The analysis cited in the book reportedly shows the door sensor recorded 0, meaning closed every 4 seconds for the entire duration of the flight.
The entire flight. So the implication is?
The implication the book draws is that, based on this official data recorder, the cockpit door was never opened, which raises obvious questions about how hijackers could have gained control from inside the cockpit.
Okay, so if the pilots couldn't fly it like that, and the black box suggests the cockpit was sealed, where does the source go next?
It looks at technology, specifically the flight systems on board.
What systems?
The book points out all 4 planes on 9/11 had the Honeywell Flight Management System, the FMS, with the Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System, EGPWS.
Okay, and what's the significance of that system?
The source claims, citing an alleged Honeywell spokesman, that this system includes a remote intervention capability.
Remote intervention? You mean someone could fly the plane from the outside?
That's the assertion in the book. It says a secret ground code could activate this function, allowing remote control in emergencies, like a hijacking, or pilot incapacitation. The source presents this as a potential explanation.
Remote control of passenger jets. Does the book offer any historical context for that kind of idea?
It does. It brings up Operation Northwoods.
Northwoods. That rejected 1960s plan, right?
Yes, 1962, a plan by the U.S. Joint Chiefs to stage attacks on U.S. soil and blame Cuba. Kennedy vetoed it, thankfully.
How does Northwoods connect here?
The book highlights one specific scenario within Northwoods, swapping a real civilian airliner midair with a remote-controlled drone copy. The drone would then fly on, broadcast a fake distress call, and be destroyed, looking like an attack.
So the book is saying the military conceived of using remotely controlled planes in deceptive ways decades ago.
That's the connection the authors make, yes, arguing that the concepts and potentially the technology for such deception existed long before 9/11.
Let's talk about the defenses. Washington, D.C. airspace, P-56, must be the most heavily guarded airspace in the world, right?
Absolutely. The book details the layers radar, Missile batteries at the Pentagon and White House. Fighter jets on constant alert just minutes away at Andrews Air Force Base.
How quickly could those jets respond?
Standard procedure, the source says, would have fighters intercepting a target like that within 6 or 7 minutes. Andrews is only 20 kilometers away.
But Flight 77 was apparently off course and unresponsive for much longer than that.
Considerably longer. And this brings up the transponder issue.
Okay, what's the role there?
The book explains that anything entering P-56 airspace with its civilian transponder off, and without broadcasting a military IFF signal, identify friend or foe, should trigger an automatic defensive response.
Automatic. Like a shoot-down.
Unless it's positively identified as a friendly, authorized military flight. Yes. The source argues that for an object to penetrate P-56 under those conditions without being shot down, it must have been perceived by the defense system as military.
So the system should have reacted. Why didn't it, according to the source?
The book calls it a complete systemic failure. It lists the criteria for interception: course deviation, loss of transponder, loss of radio contact. All these happen for 20 to 90 minutes, depending on the flight, yet no fighters intercepted.
And this was unusual.
Extremely unusual, the source contends. It contrasts this with 67 successful intercepts of civilian planes that had gone off course earlier that same year, 2001. The system worked, it just wasn't used on 9/11, the book argues.
If the system didn't fail technically, was there a command issue? The source mentions Secretary Minetta's testimony about Vice President Cheney.
Right. Minetta was in the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. He testified, hearing an officer ask Cheney, as the plane was about 10 miles out, "Do the orders still apply?"
And Cheney's response.
According to Minetta, Cheney replied sharply, "Of course the orders still apply." Now, Minetta assumed this was a shoot-down order.
But the book suggests otherwise.
Yes, the source cites other witnesses who claimed there was actually an explicit stand-down order issued, meaning do not intervene. The book alleges this crucial ambiguity about the orders was downplayed or omitted in the official report.
A stand-down order. And the book mentions something about defense protocols being changed beforehand.
A critical detail, according to the source. Protocol 1, the rule allowing for rapid, almost automatic military interception, was apparently suspended on June 1st, 2001.
Just a few months before 9/11, what was left?
Only Protocol 2, which required direct personal approval from the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, for any interception.
And
The book states Rumsfeld was reportedly unavailable to give such an order until 10:30 a.m. that morning, well after the Pentagon was hit. So Protocol 2 couldn't be activated in time.
And Protocol 1, the faster one.
It was reinstated the very next day, September 12, 2001, according to the source.
Okay, let's circle back to the object itself. You mentioned the videos showed smoke, not a plane. What about sound? 850 kilometers should be incredibly loud.
It should be deafening. Yet, the book cites witnesses near the Pentagon, drivers on the highway, who reported seeing a fast object that was surprisingly, almost eerily, silent.
Silent? What kind of jet is silent?
Very few, the book notes. It mentions high-altitude surveillance drones like the U.S. Air Force RQ-4 Global Hawk as examples of jet-powered aircraft known for relatively quiet operation.
And there were conflicting accounts of where this object actually flew.
Big time. The official path has Flight 77 coming in low from the south. But the book references testimony from about 13 witnesses, police, officials at a Citgo gas station nearby, who swore the object flew north of their position.
North. That's the opposite side.
Right, and they claimed it actually gained altitude slightly and flew over the Pentagon just as the explosion happened below, directly contradicting the ground-level impact narrative.
Over the Pentagon, that's quite a different picture. Did the source mention any other unusual aircraft?
It does mention sightings of other aircraft that day, specifically bright white planes flying deep patterns resembling the E-4B Doomsday plane.
The President's Airborne Command Post.
Exactly, a modified Boeing 747. The source notes these planes were used in the past for experiments involving remote-controlled aircraft, even though the administration at the time denied they were airborne on 9/11.
Okay, this leads us to the final and perhaps most explosive claim in this chapter, the target itself. Which part of the Pentagon was hit?
Wing E. And the book stresses two things about it. First, it was near the end of a major renovation, so fewer people were working there than usual, hundreds instead of potentially thousands.
Okay, lower casualties. What's the second thing?
Crucially, this specific wing housed the main accounting and budget offices for the Department of Defense, the original documents.
The financial records? Why is that significant?
The timing. The book highlights that on September 10, 2001, the day before the attacks, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld had publicly announced a massive problem.
What problem?
He admitted the Pentagon couldn't account for. Wait for it. $2.3 trillion in transactions. Trillion with a T. He announced a committee would investigate this enormous discrepancy.
$2.3 trillion missing, and the records were hit the next day?
Exactly. All the relevant evidence, the primary documents needed for that audit, were located in the section of the Pentagon that was destroyed and incinerated on 9/11.
And the investigation?
The source states that the promised congressional investigation into the missing $2.3 trillion never happened after the attack and the destruction of the records.
Wow, okay. That's a lot to take in.
It is. It connects the physical event directly to a potential motive involving colossal sums of money and lost accountability.
So, wrapping up this deep dive into Chapter 6, we've looked at the book's arguments about impossible physics, missing wreckage, anomalous videos, a potentially sealed cockpit, the failure of defenses despite protocols, conflicting witnesses, and this extraordinary financial connection.
It's a dense web of claims challenging the official narrative at almost every level, specifically concerning the Pentagon event.
The source definitely presents a case built on a confluence of technical, procedural, and, well, financial anomalies that it argues just don't line up.
And the final thought we'd leave you, the listener, with, based on this source material, consider all these reported elements together. The seemingly impossible maneuvers, the defense lapses, the conveniently destroyed audit trail for $2.3 trillion. What assumptions does this collection of claims force you to question?
Plenty to think about, for sure. Thank you for walking us through that chapter's arguments. Next time, we'll continue our analysis of this book.
That's right. We'll be moving on to the next chapter, which deals with Shanksville, Flug 93.
Looking forward to digging into that one. Until then, keep asking questions.
Goodbye for now.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we dig into complex sources so you don't have to read them cover to cover. Today we're tackling a really specific and a pretty contentious piece of material. It's Chapter 7, titled Shanksville, Flight 93, from the book Secret File 9/11 Concealed Facts of the 9/11 Commission Reports. Our goal here is to unpack what this source claims about United Flight 93, the fourth plane on 9/11, and how it contrasts that with the official narrative. It really digs into the details.
Absolutely. And this chapter zeroes in on Flight 93 because the official story, the passenger revolt, is such a defining moment. But the source argues the physical evidence just doesn't quite line up.
Okay, so let's start there. The official story we all know.
Right. Flight 93 crashes near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Time: 10.03 a.m. speed, almost 930 kilometers per hour.
And the cause, officially, was the passengers fighting back against the hijackers, forcing the plane down before it reached its target, likely Washington, D.C.
And crucial to that official story is the explanation for the crash site itself. Because the impact speed was so incredibly high, the official report suggests the plane basically, dissolved or vaporized.
Dissolved, okay. Which sounds dramatic, but then the source immediately points out a contradiction.
Exactly. The official report itself states that at the main impact crater, there were essentially no significant aircraft parts found. No luggage, no human remains, just nothing identifiable right there.
Which seems weird if it dissolved into that spot. How can it dissolve and leave nothing?
That's the first major point the source hammers on. If it vaporized in the hole, why is the hole reportedly empty of debris?
And then comes the counter-evidence presented in the chapter.
Yeah, multiple eyewitness accounts and reports of separate debris fields, not in the main crater, but scattered.
How far away are we talking?
Within a radius of several kilometers, according to the source. Miles away in some cases. Light debris, engine parts, stuff that shouldn't be there if the plane disintegrated in one spot.
Okay, so if debris was scattered over miles, that contradicts the dissolved in the hole idea. And the source offers an alternative explanation for that scattered debris, right?
It does. It brings up a claim attributed to a Colonel Don de Grandpré. He asserted, quite forcefully, that an Air Force general ignored a stand-down order supposedly issued by Vice President Cheney at the time and actually ordered the plane to be shot down while it was still airborne.
Which, if true, would explain debris scattered over a wide area before the main impact.
Precisely. It connects those distant debris fields to a possible shoot-down event, directly challenging the official crash narrative.
Let's dig into the flight dynamics then. The official story implies a specific kind of crash.
Yes, the source uses this German phrase, Kopfüber fast zunkrecht, meaning headfirst, almost vertically, like a nosedive straight down.
Just plunging straight into the ground.
But the book argues that for a large passenger jet like a Boeing 757, that kind of maneuver is, well, practically impossible from a technical standpoint.
Why is that? Can't a pilot just point the nose down?
Not really. Not like in the movies. These planes have sophisticated safety systems. Specifically, something called flight maneuver danger automation. It's built-in software and hardware designed precisely to prevent pilots or anyone at the controls from putting the plane into angles or maneuvers that would rip it apart or cause an uncontrollable dive.
Ah, so it's like a safety override.
Exactly. And the source claims this system can't just be switched off easily. Certainly not by hijackers unfamiliar with the specific cockpit systems. A near-vertical dive is outside the safe flight envelope.
Okay, so if the plane likely didn't go down almost vertically, what does the actual flight data say? The source mentions the black box, the flight data recorder.
Yes, the FDR data was eventually released, and it tells a very different story. It indicates the plane hit the ground at an angle of only 35 degrees.
35 degrees. That's not vertical at all. That's fairly shallow, relatively speaking.
It's significantly shallower. And that angle is critical. Think about skipping a stone on water versus throwing it straight down. A 35-degree impact, especially at high speed, should result in wreckage being thrown forward and outward, away from the impact point.
So the black box data actually supports the idea of scattered debris fields.
Correct. It lines up with the reports of debris found miles away, but it directly contradicts the idea of the plane just burying itself and dissolving neatly in the main crater.
Huh. And there's another point the source brings up regarding procedures in the cockpit, the hijack code.
Right, the emergency transponder code for hijacking. It's 7500. Pilots are trained to enter it the moment there's trouble, like hijackers entering the cockpit. It's quick, just 4 digits.
Standard procedure.
Standard procedure. Yet, according to the source, across all 4 flights on 9/11, 93, 77, 11, and 175, none of the pilots or co-pilots managed to enter that 7500 code.
None of them. Even with hijackers potentially taking time to breach the cockpit.
Apparently not. The source flags this as a major anomaly. Why wouldn't at least one crew in those crucial moments input the universal hijack code? It remains a troubling question raised in the text.
Okay, let's shift focus now, because the source makes a really bold claim about the foundation of the Flight 93 narrative.
It really does.
Yeah.
The chapter argues that the entire story we know, the passenger revolt, the let's roll, the fight against hijackers armed with supposedly just carpet knives, it all hinges exclusively on one thing.
The phone calls.
The phone calls allegedly made from the plane by passengers and crew. Take away those calls, the source argues, and the entire official narrative about the cabin events collapses.
And the source details these calls.
Yes, it talks about numerous calls, supposedly several minutes long in total, made from Flight 93 using either cell phones or the plane's own airphones.
There's also mention of some odd details within the calls themselves.
Yeah, one anecdote highlighted is about Mark Bingham supposedly calling his mother. The source quotes him as allegedly identifying himself by his full name and then asking something like, "You recognize me as your son."
Which sounds formal for a panicked call home.
It strikes the authors of the source as strangely formal, yes. But the bigger issue they raise isn't the content, it's the technical feasibility.
Okay, what's the problem there?
The source cites a study by Professor A.K. Dudney, a computer science professor from Western Ontario. His research, conducted specifically to test this, apparently demonstrated that making and maintaining a stable cell phone connection from an airplane at cruising altitude, say 10,000 meters and speed around 800 kilometers per hour, was basically impossible with the cell technology available back in 2001.
Impossible. Not just difficult, but impossible.
The signals wouldn't reliably hand off between ground towers at that speed and altitude. You might get a flicker of a connection, maybe, but sustained calls like those described. Dudney's study concluded, no.
Okay, so if cell phones are out, what about the seatback earphones? Some planes had those.
That's the other possibility the source tackles. But it states that American Airlines confirmed later that the specific Boeing 757 model used for Flight 93 in 2001 did not have those operational seatback earphones installed for passenger use.
So no reliable cell connection and no earphones on that plane model.
According to the source material, yes. Which raises the fundamental question, how are these calls made?
And this lack of technical explanation apparently carried over into the legal arena.
That's what the source claims. It points to the 2006 trial of Zacarias Moussaoui, often called the 20th hijacker. During that trial, despite the phone calls being central to the narrative, neither the U.S. government nor the FBI were able to produce any concrete evidence that the calls actually happened.
What kind of evidence are we talking about?
Basic stuff, really. Cell phone billing records showing calls made from the passengers' numbers at that time, or credit card statements showing charges for using airphone services. The source claims none of that documentation was ever presented in court. No paper trail to back up the testimony derived from those alleged calls.
Wow. So the core testimony rests on calls that are technically questionable and lack documented proof.
That's the argument laid out very starkly in this chapter. A fragile foundation, as they put it.
This seems to lead into the next section, which is about the handling of physical evidence by the authorities, specifically the FBI.
Yes, the source details a pattern, even years after 9/11, of the FBI refusing to release certain key pieces of physical evidence related to the plane crashes.
What kind of evidence are we talking about? What's being withheld?
Primarily identifiable wreckage. The source states the FBI has consistently refused requests to make public even a single piece of wreckage from any of the 4 crash sites that is a verifiable serial number or other identifying mark.
Like a part number stamped on a piece of the fuselage or engine?
Exactly, something that could definitively prove, yes, this piece came from that specific aircraft, tying the recovered debris directly to the plane that officially took off that morning. That positive ID seems to be missing from the public record, according to this book.
And this refusal wasn't just a policy, it was tested legally.
It was. The source mentions a specific Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA request, filed by a U.S. citizen asking for documents related to the wreckage. That request was formally denied by the FBI on November 26, 2007.
And their reason for denial, years after the event.
The stated reason was that releasing the documents could, and I quote from the source's reference, interfere with ongoing criminal investigations.
Ongoing investigations in late 2007.
That phrasing struck the source's authors as noteworthy, suggesting the case wasn't considered entirely closed or that sensitive information was still being actively shielded.
And it wasn't just wreckage parts, right? They also withheld info about the black boxes.
Correct. The source specifically calls out the FBI's refusal to release the serial numbers for the recovered flight data recorders, the FDRs, for both Flight 77, the Pentagon plane, and Flight 93.
Why does the serial number matter so much? They have the data, right?
The serial number is like the device's fingerprint. Releasing it would allow independent verification that the recorder presented is the authentic one belonging to the specific aircraft registration number that crashed. By withholding the serial numbers, the source implies that definitive chain of custody and proof of authenticity remains, let's say, ambiguous.
Okay, so we've covered the official narrative versus the debris, the flight dynamics, the phone calls, the withheld evidence. What's the last major piece the source brings in for Shanksville?
Eyewitnesses. People on the ground who saw things that day.
And their testimony aligns with the official story.
Quite the opposite, according to this chapter. It claims that multiple local witnesses near Shanksville reported seeing an aircraft around the time of the crash. But it wasn't a large Boeing 757 passenger jet.
They saw something else. What did they describe?
The descriptions compiled in the source paint a consistent picture. Something small, white, moving very fast and flying very low.
Small, white, fast, low. Anything else?
Yes, 2 crucial details. It was reportedly almost silent, and it was seen making agile maneuvers, then disappearing behind some trees just moments before the loud explosion associated with the Flight 93 crash occurred.
Wait, almost silent? A jetliner at low altitude is incredibly loud.
Exactly. And the huge Boeing 757 isn't typically described as small or particularly agile in that context. The description, small, white, fast, agile, quiet, just doesn't match the profile of Flight 93 according to this source.
And this ties back to the shoot-down theory.
It certainly gives it more weight in the context presented by the source. The presence of another unidentified agile aircraft in the immediate vicinity just before the crash adds another layer of questions to the official narrative of Flight 93 simply crashing due to the passenger revolt.
Okay, let's try to pull this all together. What's the main takeaway from this chapter's deep dive into Shanksville?
Well, the core tension is pretty stark, isn't it? You have the official story, heavily reliant on those phone calls, which the source claims are technically impossible and lack documented proof. Then you have the physical evidence, the black box, showing a 35-degree impact, the reports of widespread debris, which contradicts the idea of the plane neatly dissolving in the crater. Add to that the eyewitness accounts of a different type of aircraft, and the official refusal to release key identifying evidence, like wreckage serial numbers or FDR serial numbers. The source essentially argues that the physical facts and technical data presented within its pages fundamentally undermine the accepted story of Flight 93.
So thinking about this, for you listening, when you look at any major event, what does it mean if the primary evidence supporting the story is contradicted by technical data, or if key physical proof is kept from the public eye for years, citing ongoing investigations? This source really pushes you to question how much certainty we can have about events when the narrative and the verifiable facts seem to diverge so sharply. That wraps up our look at Chapter 7, Shanksville, Flight 93 from Secret File 9/11. Next time, we're moving straight on to the next chapter in the book. It's titled Entführer, which translates to Hijackers. We'll see what the source has to say about the individuals allegedly involved. So join us then for another deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning and stay curious.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're setting out again to really examine some source material that challenges, well, let's say widely accepted narratives.
That's right.
Our focus this time is very specific. It's Chapter 8, titled Entführer, that means hijackers, from the German book GEHEIMAKTE, 9/11 Verschwiegen Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
And this chapter really dives into, well, the official identification of the 19 men alleged to have carried out the 9/11 attacks. It questions the speed, the evidence, or maybe the lack of evidence presented at the time.
Yeah, the book kicks off immediately with a pretty stark comparison, doesn't it?
It really does. It contrasts the 9/11 investigation with the Lockerbie bombing back in 1988. For Lockerbie, investigators spent 2 full years pinpointing the suspects.
2 years, that's a long time.
Exactly. But then, fast forward to 9/11, September 11, 2001 happens. And by September 14th, just 3 days later, the authorities released this complete list. All 19 alleged hijackers named.
3 days.
And the book really hammers this point. That list went global, but according to the source, without a single piece of public evidence offered at that moment to back up the claim that these specific men were the ones on those planes.
Okay, so let's talk about who these men supposedly were. The source flags that 15 of the 19 were Saudi citizens, officially described as, radical Islamic fundamentalists.
Right. But here's where the book immediately points out a kind of profile paradox.
How so?
Well, if these men were deeply devout, preparing for martyrdom, their reported behavior in the months leading up to 9/11 seems, well, completely contradictory, according to the source.
Contradictory like how?
We're talking about reports of them visiting strip clubs, drinking alcohol, generally behaving in ways that just don't align with that image of strict fundamentalists ready for a suicide mission.
That is odd. And the book apparently singles out Mohammed Atta al-Sayed for particular attention.
Oh, definitely. There's this incident detailed from early 2001, months before the attacks. Atta apparently walks into a U.S. Department of Agriculture office, the USDA.
The USDA. What for?
He was trying to get a loan, a pretty substantial one, $650,000.
$650,000? For what purpose?
Get this. He apparently said he needed it to charter a plane and attach a chemical tank to it.
Wow. Okay, that's alarming.
Extremely. And when the loan officer, unsurprisingly, refused, the source claims Etta didn't just leave, he allegedly threatened to cut her throat.
Threatened her?
Yes, and then apparently insisted he was an American Airlines pilot.
An American Airlines pilot? Seeking a loan for a chemical plane? This sounds bizarre.
It gets stranger. The source claims that during the same encounter, Atta specifically asked about the security setup at the World Trade Center.
He asked about WTC security.
And insisted on buying a poster they had, one depicting the Pentagon district.
So threats, talk of chemical planes, questions about the WTC, interest in the Pentagon. What happened after this?
The caseworker, understandably alarmed, reported the whole thing straight to the FBI. According to the source, anyway.
So the FBI was potentially warned about Atta, his interest in planes, chemicals, and the eventual targets, months in advance.
That's exactly the implication the source draws. It raises serious questions about, how could this mission proceed if a key figure was already flagged in such a dramatic way, assuming, of course, he was one of the perpetrators. It points to a potential massive intelligence breakdown.
A huge potential breakdown, yeah. And speaking of things not quite adding up, the book apparently also scrutinizes the logistics, the actual movements in the final hours.
It does. It focuses on Mohammed Atta again and Abdulaziz Al-Amari, their movements on September 10th and 11th.
Okay, what did they do?
Well, they drove from Florida up to Boston. Makes sense, right?
Ugh.
Flights 11 and 175 were leaving from Boston Logan.
Right.
But then, instead of just staying put in Boston, they apparently took this really strange detour. They traveled, I think it was about 300 kilometers further north to Portland, Maine.
Portland. Why would they do that? Go past their departure city.
That's the question the book raises. It seems completely counterintuitive from a planning perspective. Then they had to fly back to Boston early on the morning of September 11th, landing around 6:30 a.m.
And Flight 11 was scheduled to leave.
Around 6:30 a.m., I believe. So they landed just about 30 minutes before their flight was due to depart.
That's cutting it incredibly fine.
Exactly. The source argues this detour was unbelievably risky. It potentially jeopardized the entire tightly timed operation. And for what? The book suggests maybe a night out, possibly paid for with a credit card, which is also strange.
So this very tight connection time,
Yeah.
does it relate to evidence of them actually boarding?
It leads directly to what the source calls a major evidence gap. The book states flatly, there is no video footage showing Adan Alamari boarding Flight 11 in Boston. None.
But wait, I remember seeing photos. Weren't there photos released showing them going through security?
Ah, yes. Those photos were widely circulated. But according to the source, those specific pictures were taken earlier. They show Ada and Alamari at the security checkpoint in Portland for their flight back to Boston.
Not boarding the actual flight, Flight 11, in Boston itself.
Correct. The source contends there's no video proof of that critical step, and it broadens this claim, arguing there's actually no conclusive video evidence showing any of the 19 alleged hijackers boarding any of the 4 planes in Boston, Newark, or Dulles that morning.
No video evidence of any of them boarding. That's a pretty bold claim.
It's a central point in this chapter, yes. And the documentation issues don't stop there. Let's talk passenger lists.
Okay, what about them?
On September 11th itself, CNN published what they had as initial passenger lists for the 4 flights.
I remember seeing those early reports.
The book claims that the names of the 19 alleged hijackers were not on those initial lists published by CNN.
Really? Not on the first list?
That's the claim. Then 3 days later, September 14th, the FBI releases its official lists, and those lists included the hijackers' names.
Okay.
And this is crucial for the source, these FBI lists were never presented as, like, certified original airline manifests. They were lists compiled by the FBI.
So not the original documents from the airline?
According to this book, no. And it claims this problem persists. That to this day, no investigative authority has produced a single, verifiable, original passenger list or, say, a boarding pass stub confirming any of these specific individuals were checked in and boarded those flights.
That seems like a pretty fundamental piece of evidence to be missing, if true.
It's a major point of contention in the source. It even mentions the trial of Zacarias Moussaoui in 2006. During that trial, the FBI apparently couldn't produce original manifests or boarding passes.
So what do they use?
They used graphical representations, basically charts or images prepared by the FBI showing the lists with the names. And those graphics were admitted as evidence even without the original source documents being presented.
Graphics instead of original documents.
Exactly.
Okay. What about physical evidence found at the scenes?
Right, let's shift to that. The book discusses the few items presented by the government as physical proof linking these men. Probably the most well-known is Mohammed Atta's luggage.
The luggage that didn't make it onto the plane.
Exactly. It was found at Logan Airport in Boston. It had been checked in Portland for the connecting flight, Flight 11, but somehow it never got transferred.
And what was reportedly inside?
A mix of things. A Boeing 757 flight simulator video or manual, an Arabic-English dictionary, a flight computer, a Quran, and his last will and testament.
His testament.
Yes. And the book jumps right on this. Why would someone embarking on a suicide mission pack his legal will?
Only for it to be left behind safely at the airport.
Precisely. It just doesn't seem logical if the plan was final.
Okay, that's one piece. What else?
Then there's the rental car, supposedly used by Nawaf al-Hazmi, found at Dulles Airport. Inside, they reportedly found things like handwritten instructions attributed to Ada, a check from a flight school, drawings of a 757 cockpit, a knife, and maps of New York and Washington.
Instructions, maps, drawings. Okay. Any other really standout items?
Maybe the most standout, and certainly the most debated, is the passport.
Which passport?
Satam al-Suqami's. He was allegedly on Flight 11, the first plane to hit the World Trade Center. His passport was reportedly found basically intact on the street near the WTC site by a passerby.
Intact after that impact and fire.
That's the core of the issue raised by the source. It describes the scenario as physically impossible. You have a paper passport, supposedly ejected from a plane hitting a building at hundreds of miles per hour, somehow surviving the massive explosion and fireball floating down,
landing relatively undamaged on the street,
and then remaining there unharmed while two 110-story towers collapse on top of the area about 100 minutes later. The source basically calls this miraculous defying physics.
It does sound incredibly improbable when you lay it out like that. Were other IDs found?
Yes, the book mentions IDs belonging to other alleged hijackers found at the Pentagon crash site, Mohammed and Al-Hazmi, I think, and also near Shanksville for Flight 93, like Al-Ghamdi and Al-Nami's IDs, a license, photos, things like that. The source questions the survivability of all these paper items given the extreme conditions.
Yeah, okay. So questions about behavior, logistics, documentation, physical evidence. This leads us to maybe the most startling claim in the chapter.
I think it's fair to say this is the source's most explosive assertion. It claims that at least 5 of the men officially named as hijackers were actually found alive after 9/11.
Wait, found alive? How is that possible?
Well, the book provides specific examples. Take Abdulaziz Al-Amari, supposedly on Flight 11. The source states he turned up in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, around September 16, 2001. Went to the U.S. authorities there, apparently, proclaiming his innocence, saying his identity had been stolen.
He showed up after he was declared dead on Flight 11. What happened?
According to the source, he actually received an official apology from U.S. authorities in Riyadh for the mix-up.
An official apology to a man listed as one of the 9/11 hijackers.
That's the claim. Think about that. The implications are huge if true. A declared terrorist, officially dead, gets an apology days later.
That's mind-boggling. Are there other examples?
Yes. The source lists several. Salem Al-Hazmi, supposedly on Flight 77, reportedly spoke to the media around September 21st. Walid M. Al-Shari from Flight 11 apparently reported himself alive from Casablanca, Morocco on September 22nd.
Wow.
And then Sahid Al-Ghamdi and Ahmed Al-Nami also apparently surfaced publicly around September 23rd, also saying their identities had been stolen.
So multiple alleged hijackers turning up alive, claiming identity theft. But the official list of 19 hasn't changed.
Correct. The source points out that despite these reported appearances, media reports, and even that alleged apology to Al-Amari, all 19 men remain officially listed as the perpetrators. It highlights this as a fundamental contradiction.
It certainly seems like one. Is there anything else supporting this idea of them maybe not expecting to die on 9/11?
Well, the book mentions FBI documents that apparently show several of the alleged hijackers had actually booked future flights. Flights for after September 11th.
Booked flights for after the attacks?
Yeah. For example, Hamza Al-Ghamdi, linked to Flight 175, supposedly had bookings on Royal Air Morocco and Saudi Arabian Airlines for September 20th and September 29th. Suggests he, at least, planned on being alive and traveling later that month.
Okay, so if there's doubt about who was on the planes, what about the identification of the remains that were found?
That's another area the source heavily criticizes. It alleges that standard forensic procedures, like maintaining a strict chain of custody for evidence and remains from the crash sites, were not properly followed by the FBI.
What does that mean, chain of custody?
It's the documented trail of evidence who handled it, when, where to ensure it hasn't been tampered with. The source claims this process was flawed.
Okay, and how are the actual hijacker remains identified, according to the book?
This is another really contentious point. The source describes the method as basically an elimination process.
Elimination?
Yes. They collected all the human remains. They used DNA comparison to identify victims, passengers, crew, people in the buildings, any body part that did not match the DNA profile of an identified victim.
Was assumed to belong to a hijacker.
Exactly. They were identified by default, not by positive identification against, say, known DNA samples from the alleged hijackers or their families.
So it wasn't this DNA matches hijacker X. It was this DNA doesn't match any known victim, so it must be a hijacker.
That's precisely how the source portrays it. It even quotes a spokesperson from the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, Chris Kelly, saying something very close to that. Remains that did not correspond to a comparison pattern were considered those of the hijackers.
Wow.
And apparently, the death certificates issued for the alleged hijackers on Flight 93 were actually issued under the name John Doe.
John Doe. Not their actual names.
According to the source, yes. Indicating they weren't positively identified as specific individuals.
Okay, there's one last piece here. How did these individuals get into the U.S. in the first place? The visas.
Right, the visa controversy. The source points out that 15 of the 19 alleged hijackers got their U.S. visas issued in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
And was there something unusual about that?
Very unusual, according to the book. It claims these visas were issued in violation of normal regulations. They were processed under something called the Saudi Visa Express program.
Visa Express?
Yeah. The source describes this as a totally unique program, apparently never used for any other country before or since 9/11. It essentially allowed Saudi applicants to get visas very quickly, allegedly without the usual thorough checks on identity or potential criminal backgrounds.
So faster visas with less scrutiny, specifically for Saudis around that time.
That's the assertion. And it wasn't just an external observation. The book brings in claims from J. Michael Springman.
Who was he?
He was the former chief consular officer in Jeddah, head of the visa section there. Springman claimed, in interviews cited by the source, that the CIA was actively interfering in the visa process.
The CIA interfering. How?
Springman alleged, according to the source, that the CIA routinely pressured consular officials like him to issue visas to individuals who should have been denied, including many suspected al-Qaeda members.
To what end? Why would the CIA do that, according to him?
The claim cited is that the CIA wanted these individuals to enter the U.S. for recruitment, training, and eventual use in covert operations back in the Middle East or elsewhere. It's a very serious allegation of deliberate interference, allowing potential threats into the country.
That is a huge claim, connecting visa irregularities directly to alleged intelligence agency actions. Okay, so let's try to wrap our heads around Chapter 8's main arguments.
Sure. Synthesizing it, the source basically argues the official story of the 19 hijackers rests on shaky ground. It highlights what it sees as a lack of certified proof they even boarded the planes, points to behaviors contradicting their supposed motives, presents evidence that several were alive afterwards, and criticizes the methods used to identify remains as being fundamentally flawed, basically identification by exclusion.
Plus, the whole visa issue, suggesting potential external interference in letting them enter the U.S. It definitely presents a narrative full of discrepancies and unanswered questions. So, thinking about all this, the question for you, listening, is, what stands out most when you compare the official account with these specific claims about the hijackers' identities, actions, and the evidence presented?
And perhaps the most pointed question, stemming from that alleged official apology to Abdulaziz al-Amari. If a man officially declared dead as a hijacker on Flight 11 was later acknowledged as alive and potentially a victim of identity theft by U.S. authorities, what does that single documented instance imply about the certainty of the identities of the others and the overall intelligence and investigations surrounding 9/11?
Definitely a lot to think about there. These are complex issues raised by the source material. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Chapter 8.
We hope it's given you some food for thought. We will continue analyzing this book, GEHEIMAKTE 9/11, next time. We'll be moving on to Chapter 9, which is titled Al-Qaeda.
We look forward to exploring that with you then. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again to take some complex source material and really break it down. Today we're looking at something quite significant. It's Chapter 9, titled Al-Qaeda, from the book GEHEIMAKTE 9/11 Verschwiegene Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
That's right. And our job today, really, is to dig into what this specific source claims. It focuses a lot on the alleged early days of Al-Qaeda, its supposed links to U.S. and Pakistani intelligence, and some very specific warnings about 9/11 that the source says were, missed or maybe even ignored.
And there's a hook right at the start. Something that really jumps out from this source material is this claim, pretty extraordinary, that several people later accused in the 9/11 attacks actually got military training inside the United States at U.S. facilities.
Yeah, it's quite a claim to start with, so let's unpack that.
Okay, so where does the source begin? It talks about how Al-Qaeda itself allegedly got started.
Right. The narrative here isn't that it just sprang up organically. The source claims it was actually formed and even trained by the CIA back in the 80s.
During the Soviet-Afghan War.
Exactly, as part of that proxy conflict. The idea was these fighters were assets against the Soviets initially.
But how is that managed directly?
Well, according to the source, there was a layer of separation. It claims the recruitment and training of these Mujahideen fighters wasn't handled directly by the Pentagon.
Okay.
Instead, it was managed through a contracted company, a subcompany called Military Professional Resources Incorporated, MPRI.
MPRI. Sounds like a typical contractor name. What did they supposedly do?
The source positions MPRI as specializing in outsourcing these kinds of military and intelligence operations. And these weren't just local fighters for Afghanistan. No. The claim is they were trained for global deployment, used essentially as mercenaries. The source specifically mentions their deployment in the Bosnian War between 92 and 95.
So the implication is a really deep early connection between U.S. intelligence, maybe indirectly through contractors, and the very group later blamed for 9/11.
That's the picture the source paints. An early operational link, heavily privatized, used in conflicts backed by Western powers.
That background is already quite something. But then it gets, even more complicated when the source talks about the accused hijackers themselves.
Right. This is where it connects back to that initial hook.
The source states that some of the individuals accused in the 9/11 attacks were actually former Bosnian Mujahideen fighters.
Meaning, potentially, they were part of that group, trained or managed via MPRI.
And then the really striking claim that they were allegedly trained in U.S. military facilities.
Yes, and the source doesn't just make a general claim. It gives specific locations, which is interesting. For example, Mohammed Atta al-Sajid.
The alleged lead hijacker.
Right. He apparently attended the International Officer School at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama.
Inside a U.S. Air Force base.
That's the claim. And it wasn't just him, according to this source.
What other places?
Well, the source lists others visiting places like Brooks Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, the Navy Fleet Base down in Pensacola, Florida, or even the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, which, is run under the Pentagon's intelligence side.
So if individuals who later carried out the attacks were not just known, but had passed through U.S. military and intelligence training centers,
Actually,
what does that imply?
Well, that's the core issue the source raises, isn't it? It suggests a massive contradiction, either a complete failure to connect the dots to track these individuals, or perhaps a kind of institutional blind spot, maybe a failure to properly monitor former assets once they were actually inside the U.S. It raises huge questions about intelligence oversight.
Okay, so we have these alleged training links. Now let's shift to the money, the financial trail. The source talks about a specific transfer.
Yeah, this is a really critical point in the source's narrative. A disputed $100,000 transfer to Mohammed Atta.
When?
Allegedly in August 2001, so just weeks before 9/11.
And where did the money supposedly come from?
According to the source, it came from Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed. At that time, he was the director of the ISI, Pakistan's main intelligence agency.
Pakistan's intelligence chief funding the alleged lead hijacker. That's a major claim.
It is. And the source adds another layer. It says that while official U.S. government sources denied this transfer ever happened, the FBI internally confirmed it did occur. That's what the source asserts anyway.
And who physically moved the money?
Also significant, according to the source. It was reportedly Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh.
Saeed Sheikh. I know that name.
Yes. The source identifies him as not just a Pakistani intelligence employee, but also a former MI6 agent, British intelligence.
Wow. Okay, so what's the significance of Sheikh being the alleged bagman here?
Well, connect the dots the source lays out. Saeed Sheikh is later named as the alleged kidnapper and murderer of the Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl.
Right. Pearl was investigating links between the ISI and extremist groups.
Precisely the kind of connection Saeed Sheikh seems to represent in this narrative. He's allegedly the link between state intelligence and the operational side just before the attacks.
And there was something else about Saeed Sheikh.
Yes, the source brings up that claim made by Benazir Bhutto, the former Pakistani leader, before she was assassinated.
What did she claim?
She claimed, shortly before her death in 2007, that Saeed Sheikh was also the person who murdered Osama Bin Laden.
Wait, that Bin Laden was already dead by then, killed by Sheikh?
That was her claim, yes. It's an extraordinary claim, but the source includes it, suggesting these deep operational ties involving Sheikh, the ISI, and the alleged 9/11 figures continued long after the event.
This high-level connection you mentioned with General Ahmed, the ISI chief, it gets even more direct, according to the source, his presence in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, the timing is, let's say, noteworthy. The source details that General Ahmed traveled to the U.S. on September 4th, 2001.
Okay, a week before the attacks. For what?
Reportedly to meet with the CIA director at the time, George Tenet, And his stay wasn't short. It went beyond September 11th.
But there's a specific meeting on the day itself?
That's the most striking detail in the source. It claims that at 8 a.m. on the morning of September 11th, 2001,
Just before the first plane hit.
about 45 minutes before it, yeah, General Ahmed was apparently in a meeting at the Capitol
With who?
with U.S. Senator Bob Graham, who later co-chaired the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11, and Porter Goss, who would later become CIA director himself.
So let me get this straight. The source claims the Pakistani intelligence chief, who allegedly funded Atta weeks earlier, is meeting with key U.S. intelligence figures and senators literally as the attacks are about to begin.
That's the scenario presented in the source. You can see why that timing alone would raise eyebrows and lead to questions.
Did it? Were there questions asked officially?
There were. The source mentions a press conference on May 16, 2002. Condoleezza Rice, who was National Security Advisor then, was asked directly by a Pakistani journalist.
About this meeting.
Yeah.
And the money.
Yes. About General Ahmed being in D.C. on 9/11 and the alleged $100,000 transfer.
And her response?
According to the source, Rice denied knowing about any such meeting. Flat denial.
Okay. But then there's something about the transcript.
This is where the source alleges an attempt to, well, obscure the connection. It claims the official transcript of that press conference, when it was published, had the words ISI chief removed from the journalist's question. Just gone.
Why? What was the reason given?
The official reason cited, according to the source, was that the audio recording of that specific part was supposedly unintelligible.
Unintelligible, right.
So the source presents this alleged censorship as evidence of an effort to downplay or hide that high-level Pakistani connection on the morning of 9/11.
Okay, moving from these high-level meetings to intelligence on the ground, what about warnings? Did U.S. intelligence have any advance notice, according to this source?
The source points to a specific military intelligence operation called Able Danger.
Able Danger. Run by whom?
U.S. Special Operations Command, via SOCOM. And according to the source, this operation identified 4 of the men later named as 9/11 hijackers.
Identified them. When?
As early as 2000, a year before the attacks.
Wow. So what happened with that information?
Well, the source claims that the lieutenant colonel in charge of that part of Able Danger provided multiple warnings to the FBI before 9/11.
Man.
And, according to the source, no countermeasures were taken. The warnings were apparently ignored.
But there were records, presumably. Data.
Well, this leads to another part of the story. The data collection for Able Danger was handled by a contractor, Orion Scientific Systems, or OSS.
Okay. What did they say during the official investigation?
Initially, during the 9/11 Commission investigation, OSS apparently claimed they'd only created 2 charts related to al-Qaeda members. And crucially, that neither chart had pictures of the hijackers.
But that wasn't the whole story.
Apparently not. The source says that after 2004, it came out that OSS had actually created dozens of charts before 9/11, charts that did include members of the terror cells identified by Able Danger.
So they had the data, including possibly the hijackers' identities.
That's the implication. But here's the really startling claim the source focuses on regarding that data.
What's that?
OSS allegedly deleted 2.5 terabytes of computer data.
Deleted it? When?
Just before the official commission hearing started.
Hold on. 2.5 terabytes in the early 2000s, that's a massive amount of data. Millions of files.
Exactly. It's an enormous archive. So the source is suggesting that the very firm handling the data for this military intel op, which had potentially identified the hijackers, systematically destroyed a huge trove of that data right before the official investigation began. If true, that moves way beyond simple incompetence.
It suggests potential obstruction, covering something up.
That's certainly the implication the source raises. Destroying evidence compiled by a military operation that had already flagged the individuals involved.
Okay, there's one more case the source details that seems, well, almost unbelievable in terms of missed opportunities. An informant.
Yes, the case of Niaz Khan. He was a British citizen of Pakistani origin.
And what did he do?
According to the source, he flew to the U.S. in April 2000, specifically to turn himself in to the FBI.
Turn himself in for what?
He claimed he'd been trained by al-Qaeda members back in Lahore, Pakistan, trained specifically to be a plane hijacker.
He told the FBI this in April 2000.
Yes, and the details he provided were chillingly specific, according to the source. His training involved practicing in a Boeing 767 simulator.
Doing what?
How to overpower the flight crew, how to fly a large passenger jet, and how to steer it accurately into a building.
That's exactly the 9/11 scenario, down to the plane type even.
Pretty much. The source states the FBI investigators in Newark, New Jersey, where he surrendered, took him seriously. They gave him a polygraph test. He passed flawlessly. According to the source, he seemed credible. He was providing highly specific, actionable intelligence about an impending attack method.
So what did they do? Put him under surveillance? Use him to find others?
No. According to the source, an order came down from FBI headquarters.
Ordering what?
Ordering the Newark investigators to stop, to let Niaz Khan go, and to deport him back to Great Britain.
They just deported him. A credible informant giving details about a plane hijacking plot.
That's the claim. It seems to defy all logic from a counterterrorism perspective. Why deport someone offering that kind of insider information?
It suggests, I don't know, institutional resistance. Or maybe something else is going on.
It raises profound questions about decision-making high up within the FBI at that time. Was it bureaucratic failure? Or was there some reason they didn't want to pursue that specific line of inquiry?
And what happened to Khan later? Did they ever talk to him again, especially after 9/11 happened?
That's perhaps the final, most baffling detail from the source. It states that Niaz Khan was never sought out or interviewed by investigators again, not even after the attacks occurred, using the exact method he described.
So even when his warning proved terrifyingly accurate, they didn't go back to him?
Apparently not, according to this source. It suggests a consistent pattern, a kind of systemic resistance to intelligence that didn't fit, or perhaps complicated, the picture they already had.
Okay, so let's try and pull the threads of Chapter 9 together.
Right.
What does this source material present overall?
Well, it paints a picture, doesn't it? Three main themes emerge from the source's claims. First, the alleged intelligence origins of al-Qaeda itself, suggesting early links to CIA operations via contractors like MPRI.
Right. Second,
these really high-level financial and political connections, especially involving Pakistan's ISI, the alleged funding from General Ahmed, his presence in D.C., the Saeed Sheikh connection.
And the alleged censorship surrounding it.
Exactly. And third, these documented examples, according to the source, of specific, credible warnings being ignored or suppressed, like Able Danger and the Niaz Khan case, and the alleged data deletion.
So for you listening, the source material really challenges the straightforward narrative.
It does. The final thought it leaves you with is about complexity and accountability. Given these claims, the deep overlap between intelligence operations, CIA, ISI, the alleged funding, the ignored warnings, the data destruction, how much does that complicate finding clear responsibility?
It suggests the lines were incredibly blurred, maybe intentionally so.
Perhaps. The source essentially asks, if the entities meant to prevent the attacks were potentially entangled with the origins and funding of the attackers, and if crucial warnings were ignored or erased, how does an investigation even begin to untangle that? It's a profound question about the nature of intelligence failures and accountability.
Definitely a lot to think about there, based on this source. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Chapter 9, Al-Qaeda. Next time, we'll continue our journey through this book. We'll be looking at the 10th chapter, which is titled Untersuchungskommission, that translates to Commission of Inquiry.
Yes, looking into the official investigation itself. We hope you can join us for that.
Until then, keep questioning, keep digging. Goodbye for now.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are getting into some really controversial source material. It's about one of the biggest events of this century.
We're diving into the 10th chapter of the German book GEHEIMAKTE 9/11 Verschwiegene Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
Right, and that chapter titled Untersuchungskommission, it translates to Investigative Commission.
Exactly. So our mission here is to use what this book lays out to really scrutinize the official inquiry into the attacks of September 11th, 2001.
And whenever we say 9/11, just for clarity, we mean that specific date.
Of course.
Yeah.
And the source material, it immediately starts raising questions, big questions about the timeline, who was on the commission, and maybe, what the real motives were.
And that timeline is the first thing that jumps out. The source says the Bush administration actually resisted setting up an independent commission for a long time.
A really long time. We're talking until November 2002.
So that's, over 400 days after the attacks?
Yeah. And when it was finally formed, the book describes it as being, and this is a direct quote, handpicked.
Okay, so handpicked. That begs the question, who was doing the picking? Let's unpack the composition, because this is where the source really argues the whole thing had built-in conflicts of interest.
Well, the public was probably expecting a panel of, impartial experts, detached.
Sure, that makes sense.
But instead, the book claims they got a lot of people with deep, active ties to the very government agencies or corporations that should have been under investigation.
So people who are maybe too close to the subject.
Way too close. The source lists them out. We see members connected to the Homeland Security Council, the Defense Ministry, the Justice Ministry.
All the big ones.
The National Security Council, advisors to the CIA, advisors to the U.S. Army. These are the core institutions you'd be looking at for intelligence failures.
And that's just the government side. The book points out the corporate links, too, right? Which seem even more problematic considering how the attacks happened.
Absolutely. The source notes advisors to huge defense contractors like Lockheed Martin. But even more pointedly, you had a lawyer for United Airlines on the commission.
A lawyer for one of the airlines whose plane was hijacked?
Yes. And a lawyer and consultant for Boeing, the company that built the planes.
Wow. So the investigators had direct links to the companies that designed, operated, and gave legal advice for the exact systems that were used in the attacks.
It's a massive overlap, and the source presents it as a fundamental flaw.
And there was another one you mentioned, an advisor to Blackwater International. The book gives some pretty stark context for them.
It does. It describes Blackwater as a private mercenary organization.
Right.
And says they had the second largest number of fighters in Iraq at the time, right after the U.S. forces and even ahead of the British.
And the key thing the source highlights is that these mercenaries, they're unaccountable, right? Their deaths don't even show up in the official numbers.
Exactly. So the book argues that putting an advisor to an organization like that on the commission, it raises serious questions about where the focus was going to be. Was it on past failures or on future policy?
And beyond the government and corporate ties, the source also gets into these think tanks.
It does, specifically the Council on Foreign Relations, the Foreign Policy Research Institutes, or FPRI, and the Project for a New American Century, PNAC.
PNAC, that one comes up a lot. How does the book connect them to the commission's potential motivations?
Well, the source claims these think tanks, especially FPRI and PNAC, had this very strong nationalist ideology.
Okay.
The book's interpretation is that their core belief was that the U.S. has, and this is their phrasing, an unrestricted Christian right to global military and economic supremacy. The argument is that these groups weren't looking for administrative failures. They were pushing for a more assertive global policy.
That's a perfect lead into our next section, because the book zeroes in on this really incredible statement from PNA published before 9/11.
This is central to the book's whole argument. In September of 2000, a year before the attacks, PNAC published this defense manifesto.
And what did it say?
It said that the process of transforming America into this dominant hegemonic power will be a slow process unless a catalyzing, catastrophic event occurs.
Wait, let me stop you.
Such as a new Pearl Harbor.
A new Pearl Harbor, published a year before an event that everyone immediately compared to Pearl Harbor.
Precisely. And if you connect that idea, that desire for a new Pearl Harbors to the commission, it puts a huge spotlight on the man they chose to lead it.
The chairman and director, Philip Zelikow.
Exactly. And Zelikow's background, as the source describes it, is, well, it's fascinating. He's not just a policy guy.
What else is he?
He's identified as a leading expert in mass psychology and manipulation.
Manipulation.
Yes. The book says his academic work was focused on how you manipulate entire populations and make sure that certain illusions or narratives are maintained for generations.
I have to ask, why on earth would you put someone whose specialty is managing public perception in charge of a fact-finding investigation? Unless...
Well, the source argues that's the whole point. Zelikow wasn't just some academic. He was also one of the key architects of the Bush administration's neoconservative security doctrine.
So he helped write the policy before the attacks.
And then was put in charge of investigating the event after the attacks. The book is very direct. It claims he was put there to steer the investigation towards a result that was, acceptable, that it supported the policies they already wanted to enact.
So the argument is that his job wasn't to investigate, but to affirm a pre-written conclusion.
That's the core of the claim. And the source backs this up by pointing to his own writing from years earlier.
You're talking about that article in Foreign Affairs.
Yes, his 1998 article, Catastrophic Terrorism. It's incredibly prescient. In it, he basically lays out the exact geopolitical path the U.S. would follow after an event like 9/11.
And this is 3 years before it happened.
3 years. He hypothesized that a huge terrorist act, one that caused thousands of deaths, would be a watershed event in American history. His words.
Just like Pearl Harbor, he used the same analogy.
He did. It would be an event that separates the future from the past. It's almost an echo of the PNASI document.
And he didn't just predict the event. He went on to detail the exact policy response, didn't he?
He laid out a blueprint. He wrote that the U.S. would reply with draconian measures.
And did he define what draconian measures meant?
Oh, yes, very specifically. He included initiating wars. He predicted a massive restriction of civil liberties, a huge expansion of surveillance on citizens, capturing suspects all over the world.
And he even mentioned
using lethal force, which he parenthetically defined to include torture and execution.
So years before 9/11, the future director of the commission had already, in theory, mapped out a response that involves war, mass surveillance, and torture, all triggered by a catastrophic event.
It connects all the dots the source lays out. The think tanks wanting a new Pearl Harbor, the policy architect defining the draconian measures that event would justify.
And then that same architect is put in charge of the investigation.
The book's conclusion is that the policy response was essentially pre-written. The commission's job was just to provide the official justification.
So if the leadership was designed to get a specific outcome, what about the actual process, the mechanics of the investigation itself? Was that also controlled?
According to the source, absolutely. The procedures were not what you'd call standard or transparent for an investigation of this scale.
How so?
Well, for one, the book details a huge limitation. Only a very small number of the commission members were actually given full access to the intelligence files and documents.
So not everyone on the commission could see all the evidence.
Not even close. And here's the kicker.
There's more.
Yes. Anything the few members with access found in those files had to be cleared directly with the White House before they could share it with the rest of the commission.
Wait, so the White House had to approve what information the commission members could share with each other?
That's what the source claims. It effectively created a filter, giving the executive branch final say over the internal flow of information. It's a mechanism for controlling the narrative from the inside.
That sounds less like an independent inquiry and more like a carefully managed internal review.
Exactly. But maybe the most damning evidence the source presents about how seriously this was taken is when you just compare the budget and the timeline to other major investigations.
Right, let's look at the numbers. The timeline first. As we said, the 9/11 Commission started its work 411 days after the event, over a year later.
Now, compare that to the commission that investigated the JFK assassination.
A single event, arguably with a much narrower scope.
And that commission began its work just 7 days after the attack.
7 days versus 411 days. That speaks volumes about the sense of urgency, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And if the delay isn't enough to make you wonder, the budget comparison really drives the point home.
Okay, lay the numbers on us. What does the source say the budget was for the 9/11 Commission?
The budget to investigate the biggest national security failure in U.S. history, an event that led to thousands of deaths in 2 wars, was $3 million.
$3 million. That seems impossibly small.
It's minimal, and to put that number in perspective, the source compares it to the Starr Commission.
The one investigating the Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky scandal.
Correct. A political scandal, to be sure, but not one involving mass casualties or launching global conflicts.
And that commission was allocated how much?
$40 million.
$40 million. So $40 million for a political and sex scandal versus $3 million for 9/11.
The disparity is enormous, more than 13 times the funding. The source argues this sends a very clear message about which event was seen as more important to thoroughly investigate.
When you put it all together, the handpicked members with conflicts of interest, the director who had already theorized the outcome, the procedural controls, and this tiny budget, the picture the source paints is.
Well, it's pretty damning. It suggests the entire official inquiry was a political tool. It was designed to validate a policy direction that was already decided on, not to find genuine accountability for the failures that led to the attacks.
A powerful and very detailed argument from this one chapter. And that really leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider.
Given these vast differences in resources and timing, $40 million for a political scandal versus $3 million for 9/11, what signal was the U.S. government actually sending about the importance of investigating political maneuvering versus investigating the catastrophic failures that changed the world?
A question worth thinking about. We have now concluded our deep dive into the chapter Untersuchungskommission Commission.
Next time, we're going to continue our analysis of the book. We'll be moving on to the following chapter, which is titled Critiker,
which means critics. So we'll be exploring the people and groups who challenge the official story. We look forward to digging into that with you.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material.
Explore the topic, question everything, and we'll see you next time. Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we dive into the source material behind complex stories. Today, we're looking at something pretty heavy, the ongoing questions around the official story of 9/11.
That's right. And we're focusing very specifically today. We're analyzing Chapter 11, titled Kritiker, which means critics, from the German book GEHEIMAKTE 9/11 Verschwiegene Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
Got it. So our mission here is to really unpack what this source material says about why certain people, folks with serious technical, military, political backgrounds, why they've publicly questioned the official findings on 9/11.
Exactly. It's about the nature of the skepticism, especially when it comes from individuals who are, insiders in some capacity.
The source material really seems to emphasize the credentials of these critics.
Oh, absolutely. The book makes it clear this isn't just random doubt. We're talking about professional, high-level dissent. The source frames it less as simple disagreement and more as a challenge, alleging things like suppressed information, even conscious lies.
Which brings us to the sheer number, the scope of people raising questions, according to this chapter. It definitely pushes back against the idea that it's just a fringe element.
Yeah, the source lists thousands of specialists. Think scientists, journalists, pilots, police officers, firefighters.
People who deal with facts and procedures daily.
Precisely. And then it adds architects, engineers, doctors, university professors, fields where, logic and physical reality are paramount.
But here's where, for me, the source material gets really interesting. It talks about skepticism reaching the highest levels. Dozens of high-ranking military officers and politicians.
Yes, and maybe even more significantly, the source points out that several members of the actual investigation commission have apparently spoken out about suppressed info and lies.
Wait, members of the commission itself?
That's what the source claims. People tasked with producing the official report, if they are alleging deception. Well, that changes the game entirely, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It poses a huge question. Why would people who built careers within the system, dedicated to national security or governance, suddenly risk everything to claim there was a cover-up about 9/11?
Well, the implication in the source seems to be that the discrepancy between what they knew or found and what was ultimately published was just too significant for them to ignore. Maybe a sense of duty.
Okay, let's get into some specific names mentioned in the chapter, starting with the military and intelligence figures.
Right. First up is Lieutenant Colonel Robert Brauman, retired USAF PhD, directed advanced space programs under Presidents Ford and Carter. So, serious defense credentials.
And his take. The source quotes him from a 2004 lecture.
He didn't mince words. Called the official 9/11 story, quote, a heap of nonsense.
Wow. A heap of nonsense. That's direct, especially from someone with his background.
Very direct.
Well,
and his conclusion, according to the source, all facts taken together prove that high-ranking government members are concealing the true events and those responsible from the public. He's alleging intentional concealment at high levels.
Concealment. That theme seems to echo when we look at the intelligence side, specifically Raymond L. McGovern.
Yeah, McGovern. A former CIA veteran, chaired the National Intelligence Estimates, briefed Presidents Reagan and George H.W. Bush daily. He was deep inside the intelligence analysis process.
So his perspective comes from understanding how information flows, how it's used, or potentially misused.
Exactly. And McGovern, according to the source, focused less on the physical details and more on the motive. He claimed the Bush-Cheney administration exploited 9/11.
Exploited it how?
To advance what he called an imperialistic agenda. So in his view, it wasn't just a tragedy, but an opportunity the administration seized upon.
That's a major claim. Does the source elaborate on his evidence?
It quotes him saying, the evidence identifying the administration as the authors of the deception is so crushing that, if true, the entire war on terror would be exposed as a fraud deception.
Crushing evidence, fraud. Again, incredibly strong language from someone who is at the heart of intelligence assessment. The source doesn't detail the specific evidence he meant.
Not in this section, no. But his position implies access to a vast amount of information. The common thread here seems to be this belief, held by these figures, that the official narrative served a pre-planned political purpose.
Okay, so if that's the alleged motive, according to these critics, how does that connect to critiques from the policy and economic side? Let's shift there.
Well, let's look at Terrell E. Arnold. He was vice director of the anti-terror division at the U.S. Interior Ministry.
Someone involved in the policy response thing.
Right. And the source cites him from 2007, years after the event, expressing frustration. He apparently said the government hadn't gotten the public any closer to the truth.
So a feeling of stagnation.
Pretty much. He summed it up like, we're just as smart as we were on September 12, 2001. Suggesting the big questions just weren't being answered, even for insiders.
And his conclusion, did it align with Brumman and McGovern?
It did, according to the source. He reportedly saw the official history as full of contradictions and called the whole war on terror a huge malicious deception. Again, that word deception keeps coming up.
It really does. Okay, now let's switch gears slightly. Paul Craig Roberts, Deputy Assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan, PhD in economics. But the source notes he also studied engineering.
Yes, and that engineering background is key to his critique. He apparently focused on the visual evidence of the tower's collapse.
What did he see, according to the source?
He asserted he immediately saw that the towers were blown up.
Blown up, meaning?
Meaning controlled demolition. He's quoted as saying, any fool can recognize a controlled demolition in the videos, not just a collapse from impact and fire.
Okay, hold on. For listeners, what visual cues would an engineer like Roberts be looking for to suggest controlled demolition versus a simple collapse?
Well, typically things like the speed of the collapse, near freefall speed, its symmetry, and often puffs of smoke or debris ejection, sometimes called squibs, appearing sequentially down the building below the main collapse zone. Roberts and others claim these are visible, while the official report attributes the collapse solely to the impacts and resulting fires weakening the structure.
So a fundamental disagreement about the physics observed, that's a direct technical challenge.
A very direct one. And then there's Catherine Austin Fitts, Deputy Housing Secretary under George H.W. Bush, also a former Wall Street exec.
What was her angle?
Similar focus on implausibility. The source quotes her saying the official version could not have happened that way. She apparently called the administration story a conspiracy theory that does not match any of the known facts.
Strong words again. Did she elaborate on the technical side?
Yes, she reportedly called it technically not plausible and dismissed the commission itself as pure cover-up.
So across policy, economics, engineering, these critics cited in the source are all converging on this idea of deliberate misrepresentation or impossibility.
That's the picture the source paints. Not one single counter-theory, but multiple lines of expert critique from intelligence analysis to physics, all arriving at a similar conclusion, that the official story doesn't hold up under scrutiny.
Let's pivot to the final specific example, which focuses on the Pentagon attack and involves an eyewitness, Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski.
Right, Kwiatkowski. Her perspective is unique. Former Director for Military Political Affairs at the Pentagon, NSA staffer. But crucially, she was at the Pentagon right after the crash, an eyewitness.
What did she observe, and what was her critique based on that?
Her critique, according to the source, was rooted in science. She said the official story gave her the most headaches because it violated the laws of probability as well as the laws of physics.
Physics again? How so?
While her specific observation minutes after the impact, she said she saw, quote, nothing significant at the impact site, no aircraft parts, no luggage.
Nothing significant from a Boeing 757 hitting the building.
That's her reported observation. She directly contrasts that with what physics would predict, a massive, easily identifiable debris field from such a large aircraft.
That's a stark contradiction from someone who was right there.
It is. And based on the scenes she did see, Her military background led her to a different conclusion. She reportedly said it looked more like the impact site of a missile than a large passenger jet crash.
A missile, M.
Yeah.
That's quite a claim based on the visual evidence or lack thereof.
It's a specific assessment based on her eyewitness account and professional background as reported in the source.
So looking back at all these figures mentioned in the chapter, CIA veterans, Pentagon directors, engineers, policy advisors, it's quite a list, all using words like nonsense, fraud, deception, cover-up.
Yeah, when you gather these critiques presented in the source material, this pattern definitely emerges. These high-level figures seem to view the official 9/11 Commission report less as flawed investigation and more as a deliberate construction.
And their objections seem to fall into two main camps, right?
Kind of, yeah. First, there's the physical implausibility argument. That's Roberts with the towers, Kwiatkowski with the Pentagon, basically saying the physical evidence doesn't match the official explanation based on engineering and physics.
Okay, the physics don't work, according to them. What's the second camp?
That would be the political motivation argument. That's McGovern talking about an imperialistic agenda, or Arnold calling the war on terror a huge malicious deception. The idea that covering up the truth served some larger pre-existing political goal.
So for you listening, what does it mean when this kind of deep skepticism, these accusations of deception, come from people within the very structures that dealt with 9/11 and its aftermath?
Well, the source material certainly suggests it warrants a closer look. It implies that if the experts and insiders are raising these fundamental questions about physics and motive, maybe the accepted story isn't as solid as it seems.
It prompts critical thinking about how even major historical narratives are formed and questioned, doesn't it? Especially when the questions come from such credentialed sources.
Absolutely. The key takeaway from this chapter, as presented, is the caliber of the critics. These aren't just random opinions. The source highlights individuals with deep expertise in relevant fields, engineering, intelligence, military strategy, policy, all reportedly concluding the official version is fundamentally wrong, either physically or politically or both.
We've really unpacked the range of critics outlined in this chapter. And naturally, hewing these challenges leads to the next question. What were the consequences? The effect of the official narrative becoming the dominant one.
Exactly. If there's this level of high-level doubt about the foundation, what does the source say about the structure built upon it? What were the repercussions?
And that is precisely what we'll explore in our next deep dive. We'll be looking at the final chapter of GEHEIMAKTE 9/11, which is titled Die Folgen, the Consequences. We'll analyze what the source material details about the lasting impact.
Looking forward to digging into that. Thanks for joining us today as we work through this pretty intense material.
Absolutely. Keep questioning, keep thinking critically, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive.
Good to be here.
Today we're doing something a bit special, actually. We're reaching the end of our analysis of this particular German source on 9/11.
That's right. This session covers the 12th and, importantly, the final chapter. It's titled Die Folgen, the Consequences.
And it's from the book GEHEIMAKTE 9/11, Verschwiegene Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
Exactly.
So our mission today is really to get into what this source claims were, the big results, the legal shifts, the changes in government structure, the military actions, even the financial fallout that happened globally right after September 11th.
And we'll also look at how the book wraps things up, its final arguments about the official story.
Okay.
The source kicks things off with a pretty stark premise. It basically argues the world changed fundamentally.
Fundamentally, how?
Well, it claims that things like human rights, democratic freedoms, the kind of stuff built up over time in constitutional states, that these were systematically taken apart.
Starting in the U.S. and then spreading?
That's the argument presented, yes.
Yeah.
A global shift.
All right, let's start digging into that. The book points first to legislative action, right? The laws passed almost immediately.
Yeah, the big one they focus on right away is the USA Patriot Act 1. Passed, October 25th, 2001, barely 6 weeks later.
And the claim is this wasn't just tweaking things, it was overriding parts of the U.S. Constitution.
That's the core assertion. The source synthesizes this idea that the Patriot Act kind of bypassed constitutional protections by creating this broad category, terror suspect.
Which then changes the rules for anyone falling into that category.
Precisely. The focus shifts according to the book, from proving a specific crime to applying this label.
Okay, so what specific powers does the book say this law granted? Give us some examples.
Well, some pretty dramatic ones are listed. House searches without the person even knowing, if they're classified that way.
Without their knowledge.
That's the claim. Also, FBI monitoring of phones, internet, all without needing a traditional judicial warrant.
And forcing companies like phone and internet providers to hand over data. That's in there too. Wow. Okay, what else?
Then there's the detention aspect. The source claims indefinite detention for non-U.S. citizens without trial.
Indefinitely, without trial.
That's what's alleged. And monitoring bank transactions, too, even if there's no specific crime suspected.
Just monitoring financial activity based on suspicion.
Based on the classification, yeah.
Right.
And maybe the most controversial point raised is allowing the CIA to operate domestically.
The CIA. But aren't they supposed to be focused on foreign intelligence, strictly outside the U.S.?
Traditionally, yes.
Yes.
So the source argues this law blurred that line, fundamentally, giving an agency supposedly outside public control domestic surveillance powers.
That is a major shift they're describing. And this was just Patriot Act 1.
Right. Then comes Patriot Act 2.
And what did that add, according to the source? More of the same.
It seems like an expansion, focusing even more on data. The book talks about mass data collection, increased monitoring, and something called Vorratsdatenspeicherung.
What do you mean?
Basically, data retention, storing everyone's data.
Everyone's, not just suspects.
The alleged scope is universal. All electronic communication, mobile calls, voicemail, email, chats, texts, you name it. Plus, unlimited collection and storage of biometric data for all citizens.
So the claim is a move from targeted surveillance to potentially universal surveillance.
Nope, that's the picture the source paints.
Yeah.
First, the legal framework, then broadening its reach.
And then came the structural changes to government itself.
Exactly. The Department of Homeland Security, established November 25th, 2002.
DHS. We hear about it all the time now, but the book frames its creation as massive.
Yeah, they call it the largest restructuring of the U.S. government in history. Suddenly, it's the third largest security and surveillance agency.
And what did it bring together under one umbrella?
A whole range of areas: transportation security, customs, border protection, immigration, FEMA, the Emergency Management Agency, Coast Guard, even the Secret Service.
So a huge consolidation of domestic security and surveillance power.
That's the argument, centralizing control.
Okay, so we have these big changes domestically, new laws, new surveillance powers, a whole new government department. How does the source connect this to what happened globally?
Well, the argument is that these domestic shifts paved the way for changes in how the U.S. acted on the world stage, particularly regarding military action and legal standards.
Where does that lead us?
To the Military Commissions Act, passed September 28, 2006. This is presented as another major turning point.
Okay, and what did this act do, according to the book?
It defined this term, illegal hostile combatants. And it set up a system for dealing with them that, the source claims, operated outside the normal rule of law.
Outside the rule of law, how?
The claims are pretty severe. Things like no right to legal counsel, indefinite detention without trial continuing, and, well, the allowance of sharp interrogation methods.
Which the source translates as?
Folter. Torture. It's stated quite plainly.
Wow. And legally, how did they justify this, according to the book?
The source claims it involved fundamentally altering legal principles. The big one mentioned is the abolition of habeas corpus.
Habeas corpus. That's the right to challenge your detention before a judge, right? A cornerstone of law for centuries.
Exactly. The claim is this act effectively removed that check for these individuals.
So the judicial oversight on imprisonment was just gone.
That's the assertion. The justification reported in the book revolves around this illegal, hostile combatant status, placing them outside traditional protections.
And in these military trials, what were the rules?
The book states the prosecution didn't have to present all its evidence, and crucially, any appeal based on the Geneva Conventions was specifically disallowed.
So stripping away established international legal protections as well.
That's the picture painted. A parallel legal system, essentially.
This shift towards operating outside established law, did the source connect it to broader military doctrine?
Yes, very directly. It links it to the legitimization of preventive wars, Vorbegender Angriffskrieg, by the Bush administration.
The idea that you could attack a country not because it attacked you, but because it might pose a threat in the future.
Precisely. A doctrine the source argues fueled major global conflicts.
And what were the physical consequences claimed, beyond the legal changes?
The book talks about a massive push for and construction of torture prisons around the world.
Where?
Primarily located, it says, in dictatorial or unstable third world countries where the rule of law was weak or non-existent. Places where these methods could be used away from scrutiny.
Let's put some numbers on this. The source provides data on the wars, doesn't it?
It does. For Afghanistan, starting in 2001, the stated objective in the book isn't just fighting terror, but geopolitical expansion, controlling the region.
And the human cost cited.
Up to 2009, the figures given are 2,210 coalition soldiers killed, but 17,419 civilians killed, and over 48,000 injured civilians.
That's a huge civilian toll compared to military losses.
It is. And then there's Iraq from 2003.
What was the claimed objective there, according to the source?
Again, geopolitical aims transforming the region and securing long-term energy supplies. Oil, basically.
And the casualties cited for Iraq, up to 2011 this time.
These numbers are even more staggering. 5,665 coalition soldiers dead, but almost 900,000 civilians, 894,673 killed.
Nearly 1 million civilians.
According to the figures presented in the source, yes. And over 1.6 million injured civilians. 1,690,903.
Those numbers are almost hard to comprehend.
They are. And the source also notes another major shift alongside these conflicts.
Which is?
The privatization of war. Massive outsourcing of combat roles, supply lines, logistics, all going to private companies, subcontractors.
So not just government armies fighting, but private corporations heavily involved in the mechanics of war.
That's the claim. A significant shift in how these wars were conducted.
Right, shifting gears slightly, but still under consequences.
What about the financial side? The book touches on the U.S. national debt, right?
It does, and it uses a comparison that really jumps out at you.
What's the comparison?
It claims that the total national debt accumulated by all 42 U.S. presidents combined, from George Washington right up to the year 2000.
Okay, so over 220 years of history.
Totaled $1.01 trillion. $1.01 trillion over 2 centuries.
All right. Then it contrasts that with President George W. Bush. In just his first 5 years, 2001 to 2005,
yes,
he alone, the source claims, added $1.05 trillion to the national debt.
Wait, more in 5 years than in the previous 224 years combined.
That's the stark comparison the book makes, $1.05 trillion versus $1.01 trillion.
Where does the source say that money went? Was it explicitly linked to the wars and the new security apparatus?
Yes, the book attributes it generally to the costs associated with setting up DHS, the broader security infrastructure, and fighting the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. It frames it as the cost of this new era.
The financial cost, dwarfing everything that came before. That's quite a claim.
It really underscores the scale of the changes being described.
So all these consequences, legal, structural, military, financial, bring us to the book's conclusion, the Nachwort, or afterword.
Right. This is where the authors essentially sum up their case.
And what is that final assertion?
It's pretty direct.
Yeah.
They state that the evidence presented throughout the book proves the official 585-page 9/11 Commission report is false.
Not just flawed, but false.
That's the word used. And therefore, they argue, the facts presented should be enough to trigger a new, truly independent and comprehensive investigation into what actually happened on 9/11.
A reopening of the case, essentially.
Based on the evidence they claim to have uncovered, yes.
But then the book claims this call for a new investigation was rejected.
Yes, it states that neither the Bush administration, described as fundamentalist neoconservative, nor the Obama administration, described as moderate neoliberal, was willing to allow such an investigation.
Different administrations, same outcome, according to the source.
That's the claim. And they back this up by quoting both presidents. Again, we need to report these impartially.
Of course. What does the book quote President Bush as saying?
It quotes him from November 10, 2001, talking about the need to speak the truth about terror and, quote, never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves, away from the guilty, end quote.
So framing alternative accounts as lies shifting blame.
That's how the quote is presented. And then there's a quote from President Obama.
From when?
June 4th, 2009. He's quoted stating very clearly that Al-Qaeda killed almost 3,000 people on 9/11, and that the facts of the event weren't up for debate. The direct quote included is, these are not opinions to be debated. These are facts to be dealt with, end quote.
So both administrations, according to the source's quotes, essentially shut down further debate on the core facts.
That's the conclusion the book draws from these statements, that Official channels were closed to revisiting the event.
Which leads the book to its final call to action.
Exactly. Since, in the book's view, no official truth-seeking is intended, it argues that the 9/11 truth movement becomes crucial.
As the primary driver for demanding answers.
Yes. It claims the movement has grown significantly and is demanding a stop to what it calls the falsification of history and the ongoing restriction of rights. The book explicitly encourages readers to get involved, to demand that independent investigation.
A very direct appeal at the end.
Absolutely.
Okay, well that brings us to the end of this deep dive, covering some really intense claims about the legal, structural, military, and financial fallout detailed in Die Folgen.
And remember, this was our analysis of the 12th and indeed the final chapter of that book, GEHEIMAKTE 9/11 Verschwiegene Tatsachen des 9/11 Commission Reports.
It's certainly given us, and hopefully you, a lot to think about regarding the source's perspective on the balance between security and liberty, the costs of conflict, and the nature of official narratives.
Definitely food for thought.
And if you're interested in exploring this source material further, the authors make the entire book available for download on their website. That's www.nebel.cc.
Nebel, Nebel.icc.
Right, and the website also apparently features other interesting publications and film documentaries related to this topic if you want to explore their perspective more.
So, plenty more material there if this has piqued your interest.
Indeed. We really want to extend a sincere thank you to you, our listeners, for sticking with us through this detailed exploration.
Yeah, thanks for your curiosity and, frankly, your perseverance. These topics can be dense and demanding.
We appreciate you joining us for the deep dive. Until next time.